Who calls it to order? Am I supposed to do that?
You call to order and then ask me to take the roll, and then I'll do that.
Okay. All right. I don't know why I forgot that, but I did. All right. Well, good evening. I'm going to call a meeting for the Housing Element Committee to order. And Laura, can you please do the roll call?
Yes, Jeff Elfs,
Here.
Amy Armsby, Sue Crane,
Here.
Sarah Dory,
Present.
Bill Kelly,
Here.
Ann Koff-Sill,
Here.
Andrew Pierce,
Here. Sorry.
great. Nicholas Targ, Bob Turcott,
Here.
Janie Ward,
Here.
Sarah Wernikoff,
Here.
Helen Walter,
I'm here. Thank you.
Vice Chair Al Sill,
Here.
and Chair Jocelyn Swisher.
Here. Thank you. Okay, on oral communications, you want me to read the little? So persons wishing to address the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee on any subject not on the agenda may do so now. Please note, however, that the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee is not able to undertake extended discussion or action tonight on items not on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. And we've got Dylan helping us with the timer tonight. Okay. Are there any public comments out there? Participants.
I have Monica Cheney with her hand up. Monica, I will go ahead and give you permission to speak, and then I'm going to go ahead and start your 2 minutes. Can you speak, Monica?
Looks like she's muted on the screen.
Okay, I think I was able to undo it on my end. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'll go ahead and start your 2 minutes now.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Monica Cheney. I see on the agenda tonight a discussion of sort of coming up with a list of potential sites in Portola Valley for how we were going to satisfy our housing RENA number obligations. And I wanted to alert the committee to the situation with SB 9 in particular, not as much SB 10, but in particular SB 9, the recent legislation signed into effect. And there was a recent town council meeting and presentation by staff about this new legislation and what is anticipated in Portola Valley as a result of it. And it's a very significant change to our town. It looks as though there will be ministerial lot splits for virtually every single lot in our town. There's not a single one that has been ruled out so far. And when I say ministerial, it truly is ministerial. You go and you submit an application and you get a lot split. And then on top of that, for each lot, you can have 2 new units. Or the existing one that you might have on an existing property, plus another SB 9 unit. So 2 houses on each unit. And it would seem that you can also have ADUs, perhaps 1 ADU and 1 junior ADU. That part seems to be a little bit unclear. And we can ask and continue to ask Laura Russell and our legal counsel how their interpretation is of that particular issue about whether or not the SB 9 units can also have ADUs attached to them. And the reason I bring this up is, first of all, to alert you to this, because this would completely change our town in many ways and is disconcerting for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is fire hazard and the usurpation of local control over our community. But I also want to highlight it because if this is really happening, which it appears to be, we don't need to consider any further how we're going to come up with a plan to accommodate our RENA numbers. We can simply say, we will accommodate them by SB 9. And that would essentially mean every single residential lot in Portola Valley. So
Okay. Thank you, Monica.
that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Monica. Appreciate your talking, sharing that. Okay, Do we have any other comments people want to make from the public?
I have Dana Breen with her hand up. So Dana, I will go ahead and give you permission to speak. And are you able to speak on your end, Dana?
There, do you have it?
Yes. Yes, I'll go ahead and start your 2 minutes now.
Thank you. And in the future, please don't give me permission to speak. This is a public hearing. Hi, all. A few comments which might be helpful to our fellow residents serving on this committee. If you've not yet studied the general plan in its entirety, the introduction and community goals section of the GP has not changed much since 1964, and any changes which did happen have been minimal. The town incorporated in 1964 to stop the county from putting a subdivision on Windy Hill. That effort was to institute local resident control from the county. We stood up then, and now the town should not capitulate to the demands of the state. From my memory, all members of the town council campaigned for their positions using their passion for our current general plan. This is a representative government. I supported all of them because of their stated love, respect, and support of the general plan. Members of the community have rich and exciting ideas. Currently, you are learning from non-resident consultants and staff. Sorry, I just lost my place. One resident wrote to me several days ago and suggested the annexation of Ladera and the lands of Webb Ranch adjacent to Highway 280. This is a very interesting thought because of the fire danger. Ladera is ostensibly a cul-de-sac off of Alpine Road and will be challenged if there is a need to evacuate. There is also the possibility of creating yet another evacuation route through that land. Housing should be solved where transportation systems are in place to get residents to and from jobs they need. Spreading development into rural areas will exacerbate traffic and good distributions. Have you heard this idea from the facilitators? Please make sure you're not only listening to consultants, but your fellow residents. I think a charrette with residents would be a great idea. The general plan is conceived of brilliantly and is internally consistent through all the elements. Make sure if you consider changes that you study the implication to any other element. You need to understand that a change to the housing element will impact the entire plan, and the residents need to be aware of your thoughts. I know this is hard work and I applaud my fellow residents' efforts. Just an aside, I was dismayed to see on the public comments not included in your your notes from last meeting. How are the residents who don't come to meetings supposed to get a digest of the actual meeting? I don't understand it, but I guess the residents don't. And I also hope that someone is going to set up some technology in the community so people who do attend meetings can see who is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
All
We've
right.
got Dale.
Sure. Okay, Dale. I'll go ahead and you should be able to unmute on your end.
Dale. Dale, lead the meeting.
You hear me now?
There it is.
Yes.
All right, there he is.
Okay, great. I just had a comment on the meeting last week, the community meeting on housing. And I have to say, I was extremely disappointed with the breakout. I felt that our moderator in my group did not even come close to actually portraying the feelings of the residents in our group. And I heard from at least one other group who also said that the moderator or whoever they were did not adequately represent the feelings of the group. And I think this is a huge failing of the entire operation. And if you do not get a complete, unedited, unfiltered compendium of the comments of the residents, that's an absolute failing on the part of the town and this consulting group. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Okay, it looks like that's it for public comments. All right, so I just wanted to share, I checked in with Sarah and Jeff and Jeremy a little earlier, and we've heard a variety of feedback about whether we should stick to the allotted time that we've got on the agenda for all the agenda items, or allow it to kind of be more free form. And we've decided that we want to really tonight try and stick to the allotted time on the agenda. So I've got 5 minutes now for the values, decorum, and public comment section, and then we're going to turn it over to Laura, and I'm going to sort of work with the team to stick to the time tonight. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so we're going to go back to this just really briefly. This is important, I think, for everybody to sort of have buy-in on. And we had some good input last week on the committee's charge, the values, and the approach to decorum and public comment. And so this is the edited version, and you had it in your packet for the meeting. But I want to just quickly go through this and just make sure that everybody's kind of on board. So the town council direction, we're developing a housing element that complies with state law. Plans for the town's assigned RENA and will be certified by the Housing and Community Development. A housing element that reflects town values and goals and incorporates best possible planning for safety considerations. So that's the committee's charge, what we're doing here. And so we added in the safety one there, and then in the next one. On the committee's values, it's really tied to the town's general plan. Support diversity, equity, and inclusivity, family-friendly community. We support planning for housing that's mindful of Portola Valley's rural character, and we uphold the town's safety considerations. So that's the revised values statement. And then the last thing is the decorum. And, really, I want to just remind our committee as well as the public that these are sort of the values we want to uphold in terms of how we behave with one another in these meetings. It's great to have us all involved, but we want to all listen and be curious. We want to assume that our committee members, fellow committee members, and friends in town who are participating have positive intent. We want to respect differences. We want to maintain an orderly discussion and be respectful of each other, and then also seek consensus when the time comes to having to make decisions. So I just want to see if the committee is on board with all of this. Is there any other major changes that you want to put forth? Okay, so I can't see. Can you take away the slide now? Is that possible? Thank you.
I've got some comments. It's Bob.
Yeah, so I see your hand up. Thank you, Bob. I just want to one more thing I just want to add before. Well, all right, go ahead, Bob. If you're going to address the content of this slide here.
Yeah, and you also suggested that I put my administrative comments in this section, but I don't think that makes sense if you're going to try and keep it to 5 minutes. So hopefully there'll be a time today when I can raise those, because I think they're important to the function.
Yeah, so maybe when we do the staff update at the end of the
Okay,
meeting.
all right, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to applaud the people that are working on this. I think it's very important. I think at the end of this process, it's likely that there'll be people that are dissatisfied with the outcome. But if we want to avoid people being outraged and being divisive, then it's important that the process is perceived as legitimate. And that would be a necessary component, not sufficient, of course, and I think this document is an important step in that direction. I've got a couple of concerns. One is that I understand what diversity and inclusivity is. I'm not being disingenuous, but I don't know what equity means outside the context of a financial statement. I have a vague idea, but I really don't understand it. I looked in the general plan of community goals of the town, and the word equity is not mentioned. And so this is another topic where I think a lot of residents would benefit from getting direct input from an expert in a format where we could ask questions and get our questions answered. The other concern I have about this is, item number 3 is very clear to me. It reads very clearly: planning for housing that's mindful of Portola Valley's rural character. Item number 4 is not. It's not clear to me what this means. It's a tortured sentence: uphold the town's safety considerations. I don't know what it means to uphold considerations. I wonder whether we can word that in a parallel way to number 3. So it says planning for housing that's safe. And to me, that's very clear and unambiguous. So I have those 2 suggestions. I hope that we can put off a vote on formalizing this until we can get some clarity on what equity means. The other comment I have about the legitimacy of this process, we've already heard one concern, and it's going to be very important that we do this in an upfront way that's seen as valid. Last month, I shared my goal of us going beyond what's the minimum legal requirements and actually producing a housing element that's the best possible outcome for me, and I think for others. That means getting a deeper understanding of these very important issues. And so equity is yet another example. Last month, I raised 4 affordable housing development from the nonprofit sector, affordable equity as Habitat for Humanity does, wildfire safety, and evacuation planning. All those subjects are ones that I believe we should get expert input from. I asked to hear from other committee members. We heard from one committee member, and then the planning director cut off conversation and said that the staff would be providing this information, and time is short, so she advised against it.
Can I jump in? Sorry, Bob.
So let me just finish, if that's okay.
Yeah,
if
well, I
that's all
want to
right.
get
So-
into the next part of the meeting. So if you can just summarize, please. Thanks.
Okay. I think it's important that the process be legitimate, and that includes us having a full conversation about important issues. Does this committee have the autonomy and the agency to arrange for its own education? Are we at liberty to discuss the issues at length and fully, or are we going to be limited to an arbitrary time limit? And then finally, really my question for the chair is, what's the downside of holding supplementary meetings in which experts share their expertise, and we're given an opportunity to ask them questions so we can become fully educated, as can the residents? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, for sharing your concerns. Okay, I can take those concerns to Jeremy and Jeff and Sarah, because I've kind of consulted with them before this meeting. In general, I just want to say that it's important for the committee to be working with the town staff on all this stuff. So I also, in the town staff, we're lucky, has a lot of expertise in terms of subject matter. They're working with consultants all the time, like 21 Elements, as well as subject matter experts they're consulting with. So if you have kind of technical questions that are coming up in your mind around fire safety or any topic like that, I do encourage you to reach out to Jeremy and Laura. And, you can ask them about the consultants that are involved, as well as just questions about whatever the topic is. We are in kind of a tight timeline as a committee. We've got a lot of work to do, and I just want to say that we're sort of trying to streamline the meetings and the discussion as much as we can, and not have a lot of discussion that's not directly involved to the agenda at hand. So that may not be totally satisfactory to you, Bob. I would like to put the values to a vote with the change that was proposed by Bob, which is turning the wording uphold the town's safety considerations to planning for housing that is safe. People feel comfortable with that edit, or would they want to edit that further?
I like that edit. I wonder if you or someone else can elaborate on what equity means in this context.
So I mean, DEI is stuff that every single company in this country is undertaking, as well as nonprofits. So there's all kinds of
DEI, can you-
definitions about it: diversity, equity, inclusivity.
Okay.
So equity, if you go onto the internet and do some research, it says here it's the process of ensuring that processes and programs are impartial, fair, and provide equal possible outcomes for every individual. So that's kind of the gist of it. And I don't want to have a big discussion about DEI since it's so kind of commonplace right now, and we were just referencing these terms that are commonly used.
I have to
in terms of
plead
the
ignorance.
edit,
I apologize.
okay, so Bob, we need to move along here. So
Okay.
I'm willing to do the edit to number 4. Is that the committees support planning for housing that is safe? Are there any other edits to that sentence you'd want to make?
No, thank you.
Amy?
Yeah, I would just point out that I don't really think it's within the purview of this subcommittee to ensure the safety of housing generally. I think I understand that special consideration, we may decide we want to give special consideration to fire safety, but I do have some concerns about the general statement that that one of our values or one of our tasks is to ensure that housing is safe.
Okay, so you like
think
the
the word
broader statement, just uphold the town's safety considerations.
But the suggestion was not ensure, it was planning for housing that's safe. Exactly parallel to number 3, we can't plan for housing that, the goal is plan for housing that's mindful of Portola Valley's rural character, plan for housing that's safe. Whether we achieve that, I think might be a question for down the road.
Okay, so Andrew, do you want to jump in?
Well, I am here on this committee as the representative of the Equity Committee of the
Great.
town of Portola Valley. So I thought when that issue was raised, maybe somebody might want to hear from
That'd
me.
be super. Please go ahead.
I think it does mean in this context racial equity, and I won't go into a long speech on it, but obviously the town and Ladera also were founded as racially exclusive by covenant. There'd be some argument that in 1964, racial exclusion was part of the reason the town was created. And certainly now, if we're going to rely entirely on ADUs or second units, there'd be an argument that those are likely to be less racially inclusive because of the owner's control over them than some other type of housing. And that's really all it means. I don't have any big access to Brian on this topic. I just thought that's, I think, what equity means in this context.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, for jumping in. Helen, you had a comment?
I would also add on the equity that there is a Callan Biro screen. We're on 4.0. I just looked it up. It's actually saying it's still draft. My understanding is it was finalized and approved. But there are 20 variables within that look at equity and pollution on communities and all sorts of things. Portola Valley is considered completely high resource, and when you're trying to get funding and a capital stack for a lower income project, they have very strict guidelines about what you qualify, and you're using, is the site, is the parcel that you're looking at near a school within a quarter mile? Is it near a grocery store of more than 5,000 square feet? I mean, is it near a pharmacy? We don't have one in town anymore. Is it near, it looks at all these different variables. So I just wanted to mention that about, so there's the state has these guidelines to decide what is equitable and what is high resource. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'd really like to just everybody want to just raise their hand if they support the wording as it's presented.
Jocelyn, quick
Yeah?
reminder, you need to take public comment before we act on
Oh,
something.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, we'll go over to the public side here. I see Christy Corley, you've got your hand.
Okay, and just before I give Christy the permission to mute on her end, the phone person, last 4 digits 4610. If you're wanting to raise your hand, it is *9 on your phone. That's *9 if you'd like to raise your hand. All right, Christy. Right, you should have the ability to unmute yourself on your end. Can you hear me, Christy? Let's see. All right, a little bit of a technical difficulty.
Adrian, I'd like your input on that number 4, because you were helping me write this. Uphold the town's safety considerations. It's more broad than just talking about housing. Were there other ideas in there that you wanted to incorporate if we do an edit?
I think we were just trying to tie back to the committee's charge, honestly, just to sort of, you know, ensure there was consistency there.
Mm-hmm.
But we can word that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and or make reference back to the safety element, just indicating that the committee will make decisions that are consistent with the safety element or something like. We can flesh it out a little bit if necessary.
I'm sorry, that is specifically what my concern is that I didn't mention. My concern was that number 4 as written will be read as us going by the 2010 safety element, a safety element that's 11 years obsolete. And that's really the reason why I was arguing for more concrete, explicit language, plan for safe housing.
I'm
Thank
just
you.
wondering if in the town there's other considerations beside housing, schools, public space, you know.
But
So
this is a housing element, and number 3 is addressing housing.
okay.
So why
Bill
not just make it
Kelly,
parallel to
I
number
see
3?
Bill, your hand is up. Why don't you jump in, and then we're going to go
Yeah,
to the public.
Sure. I guess my only point on this is as a super high level statement of values and
Mhm.
approach, this is not really worth all the breath we are consuming in discussing it. It's not really going to drive this. This is in the nature of a necessary preliminary of the sort that you see in any time something gets going. So the reason I've been quiet about all this is that I don't think it means very much. And therefore I wouldn't be agonizing over particular language. It's not going to come back to haunt any of us, I don't think. We're just going to have to make the calls as we see them. That's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Sue?
Yes, I'm looking at this as a very, number 4, as a very broad concept, towns safety considerations. And when we talk about considerations, I think about the fire evacuation, wildfire. I'm not thinking about it in construction of houses of values like that. I'm very happy to leave this just the way it is.
Okay, that's good input. Thanks, Sue. Can we go to the, yeah, Bill, is your hand?
I didn't get that.
I know.
Could you try again?
Okay, what happened?
I'm not sure.
Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
Oh, this is Sue's.
I think Siri.
All right, I'm not sure what to do.
It's your.
So why don't we go to the public, and then I just want to get people's hands on whether we just keep the language as is and then move on. So Dale, do you have a comment?
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, through the chair, Christy Corley was before Dale in line, and she has entered the room. So Christy, you should be able to unmute on your end. Can you hear me? Were you able to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and start your timer. And I just spotlit the timer for everyone's just so you know how much time you have available. So with that, I'll start your 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like you to consider the committee's charge as putting public comment in all the meeting summaries so we can see who said what. I agree with Dana in that request. Number 2, how many people are present at the meeting? I can now see that. So that's, I always like to see my neighbors at a meeting. And if this seems like more of a casual meeting and it's supposed to include the public,
And I see there's 30 on and there's 14 on this committee. And I'd like to see the remainder of the beyond 14 to 30 people. But I would appreciate seeing the public names that attended and the notes from what the public said. And I'll wait to comment on SB 9 and 10 on that agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, I'll go to Dale.
Okay, Dale, you should have the ability to unmute on your end.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Sure can. So I'll go ahead and start your 2 minutes now.
Great, thank you. I have a comment on safety. It's item 4, and I'm sorry, but I disagree with several committee members. This has to be your #1 charge. PV, Portola Valley faces an existential threat from wildfire and earthquake. It's incumbent upon this committee to ensure that its recommendations do not increase the risk to current residents. I moved here, as did most people, recognizing the risk of earthquake and fire, but I did not move here expecting that a committee would increase my risk and the risk to my neighbors to wildfire. So I think that's very important. Item 2, I think this committee really does need to hear from Fire Marshal Don Bullard about the risk of wildfire and associated with increased density, and why NFPA 1140, which you're going to hear me talking about at every public meeting, wants to have 30 feet distance between every building in the wildland interface. And number 3, I'm going to talk about the safety element. As somebody said, the safety element is 11 years old, out of date, really doesn't talk too much about wildfire. And I really think the safety element needs to be completed before this committee takes up its charge. I think it's going to have significant impacts on this committee's results. And I know that the safety element is generally done in concert with the housing element, but I think this is an exogenous situation, and the safety element really needs to be done first. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so in the interest of time, I just want to, Laura, do we just want to get the hands raised from everybody in the committee to kind of bless this language and then move on?
What's the language? Can you clarify?
I will clarify.
Thanks.
But just in terms of process, Laura, is that what we need to do?
If you would like this to be a formal statement on behalf of the committee, that I do recommend you take an actual vote with a motion and a second.
Okay, so based on input from the committee that we've heard, I think I'd like to just keep it, uphold the town's safety considerations as a broad statement that not get too specific. And I'd like to ask the committee to please raise your hand if you support the wording on these 3 areas.
We need a motion though. We need a motion.
Okay.
So I would like to make a motion per Jocelyn's recommendation that we would adopt the committee values as stated in the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay.
And then we got to go around and do a roll call.
And then we're including the committee's charge as written and the committee decorum as written too, right, in that motion?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Do we need a roll call or we can't just do hands?
I'll do a roll call since we're on Zoom, so it's in the record. So if everyone could get ready to unmute.
Sorry, before you start, I see Bill's hand up. I just want to make sure you didn't have a comment before we voted.
No, that I already said what I had to say. Thanks.
Okay, so roll call vote. Sue Crane.
Aye.
Al Sill.
You're muted,
I
Al.
saw him say aye.
Aye.
Ann Koffsill.
Aye.
Bob Turcott.
Nay.
Andrew Pierce.
Aye.
Sarah Warnikoff.
Aye.
Jeff Alves.
Aye.
Janie Ward.
Aye.
Sarah Doherty.
Aye.
Amy Armsby.
Aye.
Bill Kelly.
Aye.
Helen Walter.
Aye.
And Chair Swisher.
Aye. All right, thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. Okay, let's go on to the next agenda item. which is a committee discussion around introduction to housing sites inventory. And this is, I'll let Laura and team take it away.
Just a second, let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is a kind of a high level introduction to site selection and analysis. And then in the second presentation, we're going to go into a lot more detail. So we wanted to provide some basic information here for you and context for your consideration. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about what is a housing sites inventory, what's included in it. We're going to talk about affirmative furthering fair housing and how that plays in, and then the implementation of the sites inventory. And when we put the time on this on the agenda, we allotted a little bit more time, but we moved a little bit of that content into the second presentation. So this one is going to be a little bit more brief. So first, what is a housing sites inventory? It is a literal list of either vacant sites or sites with potential for redevelopment that can be developed for housing within the housing element cycle. So it needs to be feasible to be able to develop these sites. And it is specific. It identifies the actual sites based on assessor's parcel number, and it takes into consideration the physical features and the environmental considerations of those sites. So in our situation, that's going to consider fire safety, geologic safety, topography, and other similar characteristics of the land, as well as things that we may think about in terms of the natural environment and our values around that. We're also going to think about location and the proximity to jobs and to services. So this goes back a little bit related to equity and resource, some of the comments that Helen was making earlier. So if you've read the current housing element, I know that most of you have at this point, you have seen our current site inventory, and this is an excerpt of that inventory and the map. So it's literal map that identifies the sites by numbers and then describes those sites according to the allowed density, the general plan designation, the size, the realistic new unit capacity, the infrastructure capacity. So in this case, it was a question of, is there sewer or are those properties in septic? And then the column here is environmental constraints. At this time in the current housing element that we have, these are the geologic soil types that are included here. So today we might take a little bit different approach and have a broader approach than just the geologic soil types. So I wanted to give you that as a little bit of background in terms of what you've seen. We're going to do something similar, but take it a little bit further and comply with state law and comply with our more, our pressing safety considerations. So if you were at the community meeting last week, this is a slide that some of you have seen, but I think it's important for people to have basic information about how do we do this analysis. So we start with an identification of sites, and these are general characteristics of suitable sites. And so we're starting broad, and we're going to walk you through some of that thinking today to get us pointed in that direction. Then we think about whether the sites are appropriate for low and very low income households. There's certain things in state law that we want to consider, and then there's also practical things that we want to consider. Then we look at the capacity analysis, step C. So we're going to think about the methodology to determine the number of units that can be developed on the site. And this is something our consultants are going to help us with, and staff will be working on. Then looking at non-vacant sites and analyze if non-vacant sites are appropriate to accommodate units. And then, and the last step, figuring out whether we have adequate sites. So do we have sufficient sites to accommodate the RHNA, or whether we have any kind of shortfall? I had to move the Zoom boxes around, sorry about that. Okay, so what is suitable land for housing sites? There's a lot of language in state law, lots of words. We're trying to break it down and simplify a little bit into terms that we can all apply easily. So vacant sites, obviously, that are zoned to allow residential already. Underutilized sites. So these may be sites that are already zoned for residential, but could be redeveloped at a greater intensity of use. We also consider sites that are for other uses, but could be rezoned to allow residential, and sites that are owned or leased by the city, or in this case, the town. So the components of the inventory itself, similar to what we saw in the existing, the parcel specific list and the map that goes with it, the general plan and zoning that are on the property at the time, the parcel size and any existing uses. So this is an area where there's a lot more scrutiny that comes from state law now. So if there's existing uses on those sites, we need to think about the likelihood that those sites would actually redevelop. Then we look at infrastructure, existing or planned. For us, this is largely related to sewer capacity and whether properties are still on septic. And then there has to be a specific income category. So the number of units that are assigned to the categories that we've been talking about, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And just a note, if sites were on the previous site inventory, then there's additional requirements that apply under state law. We won't have to talk about that too much, but it might come up later, so I wanted to mention it. Then we've been talking about the need to affirmatively further fair housing, and it's important to keep being reminded of this. And this idea comes from federal and state law, and we want to work towards actively dismantling the legacy of segregation and creating housing opportunities. So not only do we not want to discriminate in the housing that we're creating, but we want to actively dismantle past segregation. So the way that this is commonly described is to say that we don't want to concentrate units in lower resource areas. And so this is, Helen was kind of talking about this, there's definitions around this. For us, it's maybe easiest to understand that we're high resource in that the town has very good schools and lots of amenities and good quality of life and access to things. And so there are some things we don't have high numbers of, but we are high resource in general. And this is interesting for us to apply here. It's more commonly applied to a larger city where you would have some neighborhoods that are higher resource and some that are lower resource. So we're going to have to think about how we apply this concept here in terms of, we have high resource throughout the whole community. So this is something we'll be thinking about as we go through the process. And we want to make sure that we don't concentrate any units too much together where there may be lower resources. We want to keep that in mind. And if we do have any kind of concentration, we want to include policies to help remedy those conditions. So we've been talking a lot about what are the different steps of this process and how does it come together? And I know it's hard to imagine, especially for those of you that are newer to this topic. So we want to make sure you understand the kind of what comes next and how this fits in. So the list of sites and the broad policies are located within the housing element. So that's really where our discussion is right now. But then we have to write specific zoning code in order to implement those policies. And so that's where we develop the details of what housing projects could look like, how they could be designed, how we would make it work to fit into the community. And so that's a step that comes a little bit further down the way. So there will be zoning code amendments that are necessary in order to implement this. We don't know the scope of those amendments yet, but we would anticipate that we would probably have amendments to the development standards. And we could easily have an amendment to the map, depending on what the final decisions are. So an important concept that we wanted to introduce to you is that of objective standards. And this is something that's becoming really prevalent in state law. And you'll start to hear us talking about it on lots of different topics related to planning and housing. And it's one of the ways that we can maintain local control, even though there's been a lot of state law changes. So we do have a lot of opportunities to write these objective standards, zoning regulations that we would be able to apply to future projects. And these are most commonly imagined through how we regulate the building envelope. So that could be the height, the setback, the floor area, the size, the amount of parking and landscaping. And objective standards, the idea is that it's numerical, typically something that doesn't take judgment in order to implement. So as you're thinking about some of these policies and how we might go forward, we wanted you to have this in mind so you can start to imagine what the future work would be and to start to focus on the areas where we can set the regulations to maintain town character and keep that local control. So I wanted to give you that little preview so that you can see how some of these things are coming together. And this is a reminder, and I think it goes to the earlier conversation. A goal of this is really around creating housing for the needs of lots of different people, connecting to the town's housing strategic plan, seniors, young people, and workers that are really vital to the community's success. So we want to always keep that in mind as we're thinking about the site's inventory process. So this is a complicated topic. There's a lot of legal considerations and a lot more information is coming in the next presentation. And I know it's always hard because sometimes people will easily anticipate what's coming next. So if you have questions specific to this topic, we'd be very happy to take them. We're into that part of this process that you might have technical questions that we're not always going to be able to answer on the fly. We're very happy to take those questions down and get back to you if we're not able to answer them in the meeting this afternoon. So with that, staff would be happy to take questions, and Cara is here as well, town attorney, to be able to help answer some of those questions. And then we would be interested in any feedback or discussion that you have on this. Questions?
Helen?
Yeah, I had one quick question. In the report, it said sites less than half an acre. And I'm assuming it's because of funding, but I want to clarify, or greater than 10 acres. Again, I'm assuming it's due to funding, and the costs associated are generally not considered suitable to accommodate lower income units. So I just wanted to check in about that, because half an acre seems pretty big to me. So that's why I was curious about that statement.
This is comes from the HCD Housing Community Development Guidance. And these are, again, those very broad statements where they're trying to make statewide generalizations. So there's been some analysis that shows it's generally very difficult to get financing for projects on less than 1 acre because you can't get enough units to make that pencil out. But again, that's a very broad general statement. So they provide that as guidance. And then on the larger side, I'm assuming, I don't know this, but I'm assuming that they have studied on the larger side too. And it may be the competition for larger sites. Larger sites are harder to come by. So they've given these parameters. It doesn't mean that we absolutely can't include sites that are smaller or larger, but there's a higher bar that we have to pass to show that they would be feasible to develop on.
And if it's a mixed use site, so for instance, say it's an acre, and say it's an acre, and half of the acre would be lower income and the other half would be market rate, for instance, is that, does that make sense in those situations?
Yeah, you could definitely have different income levels on the different sites.
Okay, but connected, I'm saying like a connected, mixed use type of site situation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? So I think we could move on to the next agenda item, if not. Okay, great, Laura.
Through the chair, you might want to ask for public comment.
Okay. Is there public comment on that item? I don't see any hands up on the public side. Okay, all right. So Laura, we'll put it back to you for next agenda item, the housing sites inventory selection, possible scenarios.
So Adrian's going to take the majority of this, and I'll pop in the middle. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Swisher, for that. So our last agenda item was an intro to the concept of housing site selection. So now we're going to take a look at some actual town housing site scenarios that we could consider as we begin to plan for how to meet the town's assigned RHNA. So our key topics will be the housing site scenario analysis process, staff's process to determine which areas of land in town to consider for site analysis, and then we'll have a look at several housing site scenarios, and we'll ask the committee and ask for the committee and the public reaction and feedback to these scenarios. So as the town plans for how to satisfy its RHNA, we start with what we know based on past development trends and upcoming projects. We know we have some potential affiliated housing units that could come to fruition, with more potential units as well if additional partners are added to the program. We also have a couple pipeline projects, the Stanford Housing Project and the Willows Project, a supportive housing project, that can be counted towards this next housing element cycle. So we know we have some unit potential in the hopper, but we know it's not enough to satisfy our RHNA outright. So how do we meet the rest? We look at our existing sites and consider varying land use strategies via a housing sites analysis process that'll tell us how we can feasibly meet our remaining RHNA. So staff has been working with one of our housing element consultants, 21 Elements, to assess housing site suitability. In this presentation, we're going to share several housing site scenario examples that we've been testing. I want to emphasize how truly preliminary these scenarios are. We had to start somewhere, and the purpose of this presentation is to take you through the analytical process that staff have been using to think about how to identify sites that could support our numbers. Again, these are very first draft, first cut, rough ideas of housing site options that we're looking at. So I'll explain the process of arriving at these scenarios, and then we'll have a look at the scenario examples themselves, and we'll welcome all feedback on that. So firstly, 21 Elements asked staff to propose several different scenarios that they could analyze for market feasibility. And they did this by plugging the data we provided to them into a pre-established pro forma. So a pro forma is the standard method of analysis for the feasibility of development projects. Any housing developer would use a pro forma to decide whether a given project pencils out. So this pro forma that 21 Elements is working with has a number of different assumptions built into it, such as local land value, development costs, and financing. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about feasibility. It's critical that any unit estimates we provide to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, be rigorously tested for market feasibility, meaning based on what we know at the time of submitting our updated housing element to the HCD for certification, there is a realistic chance that the sites we have identified will indeed be developed by the real estate market. So we want to take committee members through the planner brain here so that members can understand the process we've gone through to test out these housing site scenarios. The first thing we did really was spread out all of our town land use related maps and go from there. So we started with the maps that show land areas with physical constraints that are either fixed or unlikely to change, since this can reveal areas of town that we might want to consider avoiding. These maps are the very high fire severity zone map, the ground movement potential, and slope maps. After that, we move on to our lot size map and zoning maps. The lot size map tells us where we have reasonably sized lots that could further intensify while still remaining true to the town's existing development character. From there, we move on to our zoning map, and that tells us how land use exists in our town right now. But land use classifications can change, which is why, for the purpose of the housing sites analysis, we take a look at our zoning map with fresh eyes. So first things first, our existing general plan map. So not much has changed really since the town's incorporation in terms of land use. We see the residential land uses in shades of yellow, commercial in red, institutions in gray, and varying shades of green are associated with parks, scenic corridors, open space preserves, and agricultural uses. So we move on to the very high fire severity zone map. This is an existing map that was developed by CAL FIRE. It's expected to be updated over the next year or so. Currently, the very high fire severity zone includes Woodside, Highlands, and Wayside. So today we're introducing this concept of fire severity zones in the CAL FIRE maps, but much more information and materials will be coming as we move through this process.
And I just want to emphasize to everyone that this is only one of the things that we think about when we think about fire safety. But probably a lot of you have heard this term, the very high fire severity zone. So we wanted to put this map in front of you now. There are lots of other resources that we either have or will be collecting. There's a new county-wide map using the latest technology, an evacuation study we're under contract for, and our fire consultant for our safety element, which is already underway, is also beginning work for us on this topic. So I wanted to emphasize that we're going to have detailed discussion on fire safety, but we wanted you to at least be familiar with this map for this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. So this is a bit of a tough map to share in PowerPoint because it does have a ton of fine-grained detail. So I do encourage committee members to explore it further. And you can follow the hyperlink provided in the staff memo to view the PDF, and it allows you to zoom in. So the first thing we want to avoid, obviously, is the main fault areas. And you can see that area runs down the middle of the map. I've circled it in yellow. We're also going to try to steer clear of areas in the light tomato red and the shades of orange. Not all of them. There are pockets of stable ground in these areas mixed in a sort of light green color. But these sort of red and orange colored areas are categorized as unstable ground, categorized by seasonally active downslope movement, and areas with significant potential for downslope movement. So we generally want to take a careful look at those areas and potentially avoid them. Instead, we want to focus mostly on areas of relatively stable ground that appear in the green, the light blue, and light beige areas. They primarily appear along the Alpine Road corridor and in sections of land adjacent to Portola Road and east of Portola Road, and in some pockets within West Ridge and central Portola Valley as well. So the town slope map adds on another layer for consideration to generally focus on the relatively flatter areas of the town, since the less complicated or constrained the site is physically, the easier and more cost-effective it is to develop. Similar to the ground movement potential map, we're led to the Portola and Alpine corridors with some potential in West Ridge and central Portola Valley as indicated by the light colored areas. Conversely, you could choose to avoid areas with higher slope percentages seen in the medium and dark green areas. All that said, any sloped land can become buildable with the right engineering. It just happens to be extremely invasive and expensive. When we think about land slope, it really is a balancing act where we weigh development possibility with land use priorities and policy objectives, such as minimizing grading, minimizing erosion risk, preserving natural features of the land, and environmental protection of plant and animal life. So staff next moved to the town's lot size map, and we look at these through two lenses. One, to see where we can add some density on lots that are large enough so as to maintain town character, and two, to get a sense of where lots are located that can support low-income units. To this point, the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, provides housing site guidelines regarding minimum and maximum lot sizes necessary to support the development of low-income units. If the parcel is more than a half acre and less than 10, it's likely that the market could support a low-income or mixed-income housing project. So luckily, Portola Valley offers well-sized parcels that generally range from 1 to 4 acres each, so there is a lot of possibility as we assess the potential for new housing sites. From studying the previous town maps, we know where obviously we can't or shouldn't go based on various physical constraints. So finally, we turn to our zoning map and we try to review it with fresh eyes. How can we rethink our current zoning districts? What can be tweaked or modified as we think about planning for new housing sites. So as staff have been working through testing housing sites, we've been guided by a few main assumptions. We should bring together a diversity of sites and unit numbers to satisfy our RHNA and consider a range of housing solutions. For example, affiliated housing, ADUs, multifamily housing, a sort of patchwork approach. The third assumption is to prevent a dramatic change in the town's physical character. We do ask committee members, are these underlying assumptions the right way to go? And we can discuss that at the end of the presentation. So now we move into our housing site scenarios. What is it that we should be taking from them? They provide us with an initial assessment of potential land use strategies we can use. Each scenario is a market feasibility analysis of high-level land use policy ideas. And these scenarios are meant to help guide our next steps on sites and zoning analysis. All right, so we wanted to start with a scenario we tested with 21 elements that would have such little unit yield, it wouldn't move the needle on satisfying the town's RHNA. Here, staff proposed altering the existing community commercial district by allowing residential uses while leaving existing development standards untouched. Not only did the analysis result in a projected unit count that was very low, we know some of these sites have existing commercial businesses with active leases. These are not favorable conditions for potential housing sites. And so therefore, example A is not a particularly compelling scenario. But that said, the exercise of testing it was useful to help us better understand which types of land use alterations could make an impact and which ones are unlikely to. So this scenario tested increasing density in the community commercial and administrative professional districts by increasing the floor area ratio, or FAR, which is the ratio of the building footprint to the size of the lot.
Increased floor area rate.
In the AP district.
Can I just make a comment? Sue, you might want to, there you go, you muted. Thank you. Great, sorry.
So the AP district already allows single family residential. So we didn't test any changes to existing land uses. We just proposed to alter the FAR development standard. So this scenario could be one to consider, as the unit yield could be significant if development were to indeed occur in the existing commercial areas of the town along Alpine and Portola roads. The reason why the scenario could work is because the increase in FAR would facilitate increased development. On the flip side, we do know there are some constraints in these zoning districts, such as existing businesses with leases. So we would need to further test out this scenario for true feasibility. So example C, of all of the scenarios we tested, creating a new multifamily district in areas along the Alpine and Portola Road corridors proved to have the most potential for possible unit counts and the highest potential to achieve affordable units. As examples of where this multifamily district can be applied, we're seeing areas along Alpine Road just south of Ladera and the Nathorst Triangle area. Again, these numbers are a first cut, these unit numbers are a first cut, and staff would need to go back to 21 elements to further refine our assumptions and re-examine their analysis. But it could be a scenario to consider as we start to think about building our housing sites inventory. So here we tested the impact of reducing lot size minimums in the residential estate districts. Very specifically, we tested if the minimum existing lot size is 2 acres, we would reduce that minimum to 1 acre. And if the minimum lot size is currently 2.5 acres, what would it look like if we reduced that minimum to 1.5 acres? So the analysis of this scenario tells us it could yield 50 or more units, so it could be a scenario worthy of further investigation. Again, this is one of the maps that is best reviewed by zooming in on the lot sizes, as there's a lot of nuance to observe here. So if you haven't already, we do encourage committee members to take a look at the map online and take a closer look. So our final example here, similar to the last scenario, we again tested some assumptions in the RE district, this time by allowing additional units in relation to the parcel size. The idea here is not to include subdivisions, but rather allow greater densities to facilitate family compounds. So specifically, we tested changing the development standards based on parcel size again. So lots of 2 to 3 acres would be allowed 2 units, lots of 3 to 4 acres would be allowed 3 units, and lots of 4 to 5 acres would be allowed 4 units, and so on. The scenario result here is a possible unit yield of about 20 units or more. Again, staff would have to further fine-tune this scenario to better understand the unit yield potential. But it's another angle to take in the approach to satisfying the town's overall RHNA. So now, after having heard this presentation, staff are seeking the committee's reaction to the process we used, the staff's philosophy, and underlying assumptions to the site testing, and of course, the scenario examples themselves. I do want to mention once more that much more information is coming. There will be further mapping, further testing, and refining of scenario assumptions. We would also like to know if the committee would like staff to further study spreading affordable units throughout the community, because we haven't looked at this just yet. So with that, let's discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura and Adrian. Would you mind just flipping through those scenarios again quickly without doing the whole explanation, please? Because
yeah,
a
definitely.
lot to take in all at once, and I know you want some
It is.
discussion around that now.
It is.
Starting with scenario A.
Okay, let's just back it up.
Thank you.
So yeah, this was a scenario that appeared not to be particularly viable.
It's the residential and the community commercial. Okay. All right, and then B. This was 20 to 30 units. So was this like the number 2 in terms of adding number of units? Increasing floor community commercial.
So we didn't actually arrange the slides in order of increasing unit number. Yeah.
Okay, and then C added.
This is the one that created the largest number of potential units and has the best potential for affordable unit development. So creating a multifamily zone, it would not necessarily have to be high density like some other communities have. It could still be relatively low in density. Just to start to think about, it'd still probably be 2 or 3 stories. It, probably wouldn't have to be taller than that. You could have a reasonable height limit. And you could fit maybe 12 units to the acre, something in that order of magnitude. So just to kind of give you a sense of what might be included here.
Thank you, that helps.
Can I ask a quick question on this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I understand the spot here at Alpine and Portola. I'm assuming that's what that is right there.
It is.
What's the location? I'm unclear on what the location is in the upper right-hand corner.
It's on the edge of town coming in from Ladera. So next to Ladera Church, where they've been interested in doing a development there.
Okay.
Just trying to think there's already more intensity of development up at that part of town.
Thank you. Okay, and then D.
So these next 2 talk about how units can be distributed throughout the community, these next 2 scenarios. These would not likely result in a lot of affordable units, but they could result in more market rate units. So these 2 scenarios are similar. One kind of encourages subdivisions, and then the other one encourages additional housing units on lots without subdivisions. So this is the one that would encourage more subdivisions. And both of these scenarios were created with the idea that, open space and the rural character are important. And so the assumptions that went into these still go with about 1 house per acre of land, kind of as an underlying general assumption. So both of these scenarios kind of have that as an underlying assumption.
If you go back to example C, where we talk about zoning along Alpine Road, is the idea here that that would be a general change in zoning all along Alpine Road, or would it be limited to these areas that are circled on your map?
What we tested were the areas that are circled on the map, because we imagine that there would be some interest in balancing that priority with the scenic corridor priority. So just as a starting point, that's why we tested these 2 areas.
Got it. And if you included the area that come just south of Ladera, that if you extend it further south, you're basically getting into what is this potential Stanford project, right?
Yeah, if you go very much farther south, then you would be in the area of Stanford Wedge property.
Okay, can we go to E just to see the map there, please? And then we'll go to people who've got their hands up. Increased density in the residential estate district. So this you said was adding more houses.
Yeah, so example, if you had a 2 to 3 acre property, you could have 2 units. If you had a 3 to 4 acre property, you could have 3 units. So our interest here was to try to address the multi-generational housing that we saw a need for seniors, young people, young families that may want to live on the property that their family has owned, or they may wish to buy a property with family members and develop a couple of different housing units on it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
Severity.
So I'm going to go to Jeff. You're there. You've got your hand up, Jeff. So I think at this point, we're looking for questions, comments. Laura, Adrian, please be involved in this discussion.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
probably best to start with questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So example D looks like kind of possibly sort of going above and beyond SB9. And I'm just curious, 2 things. Well, I guess the main thing I'm curious about is have you or 21 Elements had a chance to look at, how many more market rate units we might expect SB9 to actually, open up in town?
So we have not analyzed that. We're going to talk about SB9 a little bit at the end of the meeting for those of you that aren't familiar with it yet. But we actually modeled 2 scenarios, D and E, that have some relationship actually to SB9. So it's not a direct connection. So the assumptions weren't exactly for SB9, but I think we can learn from what we have modeled to imagine how SB9, might play out in the community.
And so, well, just for example, like if you had a 3 acre property, SB9 would allow that to be carved into 2 acres, but we'd be talking about maybe a situation where maybe we get 3. Someone could cut a 3 acre property into 3 lots. So it's maybe just a slight enhancement of what we would expect to see in SB9. Should someone choose to do that? Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sarah.
Dorothy. Oh, Winikoff.
Wernicott, I'm so sorry. She's got her hand up.
First, I just wanted to make a comment, correct me if I'm wrong. This is, we also have the options of ADUs and we also have the options of affiliated housing. So, for clarity, we're just looking at potential zoning changes right now, but we have those other things that are part of this puzzle as well. I just want to make sure to remind everybody about that. Laura, maybe there's a more eloquent way of saying that, but is that accurate?
Yes, we're thinking of all of that as part of the puzzle or the patchwork. We're going to bring all these pieces together to be able to numbers.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is like we have a number, and so we'll have our affiliated housing partners, we'll have ADUs, and then we'll have this group, however these zoning changes will apply, just for clarity of thinking. My other thing was more of a question, and I'm trying to understand the differences between D and E. And is D really zoning for separate ownership, whereas E would be the same owner that would just have multiple houses that would be for potential different family members?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Amy Armsby.
Great, thanks. I actually had a question, and I think this may go back to Laura's presentation about this concept that you can't just come up with, and I'm paraphrasing and I may be getting it wrong, but that there has to be some feasibility, some likelihood that that whatever the changes are, they're going to result in they're going to yield some affordable housing. Can somebody talk more about what that is, what that standard is? Because it seems to me that may have a significant impact on which, and probably multiple options ultimately might make sense in terms of these different scenarios. Do you understand what I'm asking? Laura?
I think that I do, yes. This is an evolving area because this new threshold of scrutiny around feasibility is fresh with this housing element cycle. So 21 Elements has been working with HCD to try to get their kind of early buy-in. And so this modeling system was developed by 21 Elements in consultation with another consultant that does this real estate development modeling. So they put into these assumptions some of the things that Adrian was talking about, the cost of land, the cost of construction, the values that could result. And so these kind of rough numbers that we're giving you for the number of units that could result, that's what's kind of filtered through their economic feasibility model. And then staff has taken some local knowledge and in some cases actually reduced some of those numbers because we know that there are physical constraints that they would not have been aware of. So maybe there's a creek or maybe there's topography. And so we were trying to add that layer on too. But these numbers have kind of gone through that first cut of that feasibility analysis that we need to do.
And does the assessment of feasibility include any kind of general survey or gauging of interest in certain potential changes, like getting a sense of how many families might want to create another structure on their property? Or is that just something down the road, perhaps?
Some of that will probably come down the road. It will probably come more in relationship to our existing commercial properties, where people are actually reaching out to commercial property owners to see if they may be interested in redeveloping properties in the future. So we're still determining what methodology we might use, but some of that analysis is still coming.
Thank you.
Good questions, Amy. Thank you. Let's go next to Helen.
When you add up the potential units like B, C, D, and E, you get about 200, and we're tasked with 263 units, for example. So I am assuming that you're asking for direction with this presentation on the types we're interested in seeing more research on. Just double checking on that.
Yes, so looking for feedback on some of our general approach that we're going to take this patchwork of affiliated housing, ADUs, bringing all of that together, right? Because we'll get quite a few units out of ADUs and affiliated housing potentially, and then pipeline projects, we're going to bring that in. And then looking at these scenarios, do you have initial reaction to these scenarios? We have not studied anything where there may be affordable housing or multifamily spread throughout the community. So if the committee would like us to do more research on that, then we'd be looking for that feedback if you're interested in hearing more about that. And it's hard because a lot is still coming, but we wanted to start getting you used to thinking about how are we analyzing sites. So this is not about decisions. This is about, are we going in the right direction? Do you have feedback? Are big things missing? That's the kind of level of information we're looking for today.
Thank you. Got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, Sarah Dorahy.
Hi, I'm following on basically from Amy and Jeff's question. I suppose my question is, we have no guarantee that people in those areas of larger lot sizes will or would ever want to subdivide. So the town still doesn't have any information around that, I'm assuming. So it's a bit of a gamble, right? We open it up and say, yes, you can subdivide, but we have no guarantee that they'll do that. So we wouldn't be able to satisfy the RENA quota in that case. And then a second question, some of these areas are going to have an easier time getting fire insurance than others, obviously. So if we're talking about, developing more housing, we have to somehow factor in the cost of fire insurance for any new residences and residents as well, especially difficult for low income people. That's it.
Thank you. Anne Copsill.
Yeah, I have a follow on this calculation of the number of units that are actually financially feasible. Lauren, Adrian, do you know on like example D, what was the gross number, if I could ask it, like, if we change the zoning for all the 2 acres could now be 1 acre and 2.5 could be 1.5, how many units is that? Because I want to compare it to then the 50 here. Somebody made in the public comments, and I had this last month ask that, when you hear about SB 9 and 10, you think, okay, we're done. But then I understand that we have to put on to it the practicality of it, and it hugely reduces it by maybe even 90 and 95%. So I just like to start getting myself educated. What's the gross number here versus the 50 that came out of the formulas?
That's a great question. So I don't think we could give you that number this afternoon, but I think what we should do for a future meeting is to tell you how many lots are in the different size categories and then how many we thought might be feasible.
Great, I would love that.
Is that the right track? Okay.
Yes, it would just give me a feel and for my education and thinking about it in the future. That'd be good.
Through the chair, could I just tag on to that issue a little bit?
Absolutely.
So, you will eventually get a gross number, which will be then further refined by this economic analysis as was discussed. And then it needs to be further refined by income category. So that's really an important factor that we will be talking about at another session. But just because you are able to identify, 500 sites that could be subject to a lot split under SB 9, doesn't mean that those will be counted by the state as lower income or moderate income. So that's really an important piece of this puzzle as well. So this is just the first step that we are introducing, which is just the number of housing sites in general.
Great, thank you. That helps. Okay, next up, Bob.
One of the administrative things I was hoping to address at the beginning of the meeting was a request to the chair that you consider using the same format that other meetings do, town council, planning commission, et cetera, where committee members ask clarifying questions and then the public has an opportunity to give their comments, and then committee members have an opportunity to discuss. And the advantage is that residents hear the clarifying questions, and then committee members.
That's what I'm planning to do. I think.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd like to ask a clarifying question of our town attorney to elaborate just a little bit more about how will that be determined? Because it would seem to me that if if it's feasible to split a half acre lot, SB 9 only requires a lot greater than or equal to 2,400 square feet to be split ministerially, and with each subdivided lot able to have up to 2 units added to it. So I was wondering if there's any sense of how the feasibility would be done there, because indeed it does seem like, if we have 1,700 lots in Portola Valley, we could multiply by maybe not 4, but some large number. Drawing on the comments you just made.
Yes, absolutely. And that is certainly something that we need to investigate. SB 9 was not in effect at the time that the new housing element regulations were adopted. So HCD has not yet adopted any regulations talking about how what presumptions SB 9 lot splits and the additional units will be counted. But I think that we can relate back to what was enacted in the prior housing element, and that is that the 21 elements came up with a system for assigning affordability levels to ADUs, and there was this process that was developed with all of the communities, and a certain size and a certain type of ADU was going to be considered eligible for a lower income household. And so I think that there will be some discussion to incorporate some kind of process like that for SB 9 properties, if it hasn't already, if HCD does not come up with further guidance on it.
Thank you. Another question I had was, insurance was mentioned, and we've heard, all of us know people who've had problems with insurance. We've heard from the mayor more than once that she herself has been denied insurance, lost her insurance twice. Council members Hughes and Richards, in a formal letter to multiple California state departments, expressed their belief that if trends continue, both new and existing homes will become uninsurable. And Fortune magazine quoted Councilmember Alves as estimating that up to almost a third of Portola Valley residents have already had insurance loss. And so how is this going to be taken into account as we plan where new houses should go?
We're going to bring together through our professionals the best information that we have available to us. The insurance component of this discussion is new. When we've tried to talk to our colleagues about it, people have said, oh, that's interesting, that's important, that's a good idea. But I think we are at the forefront of bringing these things into the discussion. So we do, our consultant team, I think, is experienced and will bring a lot of value into the conversation, as will the fire district.
I imagine if the data were available, that would be a very powerful objective indicator of where housing should and shouldn't go. But of course, there's privacy issues there. Do you know if there's a way to get that sort of objective data?
I don't know. We would have to look into that.
Okay. And then another question I had was on the seismic map. The San Andreas Fault was highlighted, but there's actually a network of associated thrust faults that go all through central Portola Valley. And I was just wondering if that is going to be taken in, those features will be taken into account as well.
Yes, a lot of the smaller faults, the ones that are not the San Andreas Fault, are more investigated more on a case-by-case basis. But absolutely, yes. Okay.
The very high fire hazard severity zone that was shown and characterized as the town map, I'm actually a little bit confused because there's been controversy about that. In 2008, under Mayor Derwin's leadership, the town elected not to accept CAL FIRE's recommendations. That's a recommended finding. The recommendation was that the town designate that area a very high fire hazard severity zone, and the town didn't. And the reason for not adopting it was there was concern that it would exacerbate insurance problems. The town attorney can clarify, but as I recall, in her letter from February 17th of this year, I think, she explained that no, those recommendations were rejected, and instead the town elected to hire a consultant and have the consultant perform an on-site analysis. And in fact, Councilmember Hughes this last week referred to that as the town map and highlighted that it was a more precise characterization. That map actually shows 19 of the highest hazards spread throughout the town. And so I'm wondering why the very high fire hazard severity zone map, which the town rejected, is being given as the example rather than the Moritz map, which just last week, Councilmember Hughes referred to as the town map, and I think more accurately reflects the hazard that we're facing.
Because at this time, we figured there's a lot of committee members that were very new to this topic. So we wanted to start with the map that gets a lot of the attention and has that terminology that we wanted people to become familiar with. But we'll discuss a lot more in upcoming meetings. We'll talk about the Moritz map. We'll talk about other mapping that we have available to us. And both looking at town-wide things that we should implement, as well as geographic based things that we may wish to implement. So this was just a starting point. I agree with your characterization that this map was not approved by the town, but a lot of people continue to find it a useful touch point.
Okay, the concern is, my concern is that.
Can I just do a time check here? We want to have discussion with our committee, and if we stick to the allotted time, we're supposed to end in about 20 minutes. So
Thank you. I was verging into comments, so I'll suppress that for the comment
okay.
period. Thank you.
Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one. Just clarifying for myself. So we can open up all the change of zoning and open up opportunities for people to develop larger lot size, et cetera, but do we have to have those 253 houses built within the next RENA cycle, or do we just have to provide the opportunity? I know we're not building them, but what happens if those 253 houses don't get built within the next 10-year cycle? That's what I'm saying. So we can open up opportunities, but will people act on it? Is there an appetite for these people to subdivide and build housing? And if they don't, and we're not doing the 253, even though we've provided the opportunity, what happens then?
Great question. We're going to cover at least some of that in our last presentation tonight. So if you have questions after that, that might be a good time for us to take more questions.
And I have a couple of questions for you, please. First one is, do you have any sense of the number of ADUs and affiliate housing that we could project for the next cycle?
We are working on this, and I don't want to overstate it until we've analyzed this a little bit more. So we're looking at our ADU production, and they're asking us to use a methodology that considers the last few years. But we had a really big decrease in ADU production, I think, because of the pandemic. So I want to get some better numbers from this year and then work with HCD to see if we can use a little bit different measure and how we're projecting into the future. So we're working on that actively. And then for affiliated housing, I think we need to see how a couple of our affiliated partners, how their perception is going, how things are going at the Sequoias. And then we need to decide if there's going to be additional partners added into the mix, and then start to think, what is the development potential of those properties of people who wish to join the affiliated housing program. So we're working on that, and we'll bring more back.
Okay. So I'm just kind of wondering, if you were to guess, is it like 100 units between those two, something around that, or more like 50? Can you even guess in terms of like a range? I'm just trying to prioritize with other scenarios, I guess.
Trying to get the order of magnitude.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna guess, I think guessing about 100 is a good guess.
Between the two.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now my second question, thank you for guessing, and I know it's preliminary. We will not be holding you to this. The other question I had is, what's your sense of where we can maximize the number of low and moderate income level housing in terms of these different scenarios? Because I'm feeling like with D&E, if we're building up in Westridge and it's expensive land, that may not be as appealing for that segment. But I'm curious what you say.
I think the scenario that creates multifamily zoning on Alpine and at the Northwest Triangle area is probably the strategy that would get the most affordable units.
Okay. And then what about B? With the commercial and AP
I think that could result in affordable units as well. So
Mhm.
there's a lot more feasibility work to do on that, but I think that also has potential for affordable units.
Okay, so C and B in terms of affordable units. Thank you very much. Sarah, you've got one other question?
Yeah, I guess maybe just, it's a suggestion, maybe,
Go ahead.
maybe for the next meeting. I think it would be helpful, and I know, again, to reiterate what Jocelyn said, it's not holding you to it, but it might be helpful to kind of see the math of, ADUs, affiliated housing, pipeline projects. Okay, we subtract all of that, then what are we left with? And I think, my gut, based on the things I know, it feels like, maybe half of the 253. But it would be interesting to see. And again, if we look at it, everybody as part of this committee needs to know that these are not numbers we're holding to, but it will help people wrap their heads around, I believe, putting A through E into context of what the number is that we actually have to hit with those, 4 or 5 strategies.
And I
like
think
that idea.
yeah, I think we can do that for the next meeting probably in terms of what information is coming into us. So we could at least give you some things to think about at the next meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So thanks, Sarah. And then Sarah Dorahy, you went away. You're good. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Do we have questions in the public? Okay. I'd like to turn it then to just more of a discussion and sort of hear from people who haven't yet spoken, especially what your thoughts are about these different scenarios.
Through the chair, we do have 2 hands up from the public now.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Back to the public. Tim Clark.
I will go ahead and give you permission. You should be able to mute on your end, Tim. Can you hear me?
Tim, can you unmute or do you need to do that, Dylan? There we go. Tim, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead and start your 2 minutes now.
Thank you. I have basically a question, and I suppose it's for staff, but what is the process and the timeline for landowners in town who may want to build housing to make that known and to be included in the plans you're putting together?
Through the chair, if you'd like me to answer, I think.
Clarify that.
Yeah, I think, Tim, if you want to tell this group, if you wanted to send an email, for example, and I could pass it on to this committee so they could know what your interest is and what you'd like to build at the Ladera Church property, and then they could bring that into their considerations. So that would be a great way to go about it for you to show your interest. And then in terms of the process, where the process is going to go through the end of next year to be able to adopt everything. But as soon as you felt comfortable submitting materials, expressing your interest, we'd be very happy to receive them and bring them into the committee's process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next hand, the public, Christy Corley, go ahead.
Okay, Christy, you should be able to unmute on your end.
Christy, can you unmute? Go ahead.
It looks like now I can unmute. Thank you.
Okay.
2 minutes will start now, Christy.
Okay, I'm noticing, I'm wondering how many ADUs we built in Arena Cycle 5. I've asked a number of times and I can't seem to get an answer. And my second question is, you just said that a lot can split into 3, and it's my understanding that a lot can split into 2 with SB 9. If you can clarify that, Laura. And my third question is, you mentioned the Willows proposal. The public and residents do not know anything about that proposal, and we would like to be updated as well as this group is updated. In the future, if you put on maps for this, could you make sure that Alpine Road and Portola Road are on your maps? I live on Portola Road. I'm very interested in Portola Road. I don't want to sit there and try to figure out where Portola Road is on maps that you're presenting. Thank you. And then I have a few other things. I went to the town council meeting the other night, and there was something said that we were in the process of writing an urgent ordinance for the town that would limit 2 800 square foot units as a part of SB 9. Can you please clarify for this group what that ordinance is? You also refer to a hyperlink in the staff report. The public would also like to have the hyperlink. And anytime you have colors on a map, if you could put what the colors mean rather than just verbally, please put it in your slide. That would help us when we're referring to it in the future. And when you say members of the group, you're also talking to residents of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Laura, are there any things there that you just want to address just to clarify now?
Quickly, how many ADUs built in RENA 5? Approximately 82 to 84. Lot splits into 3. I was talking about this scenario that we analyzed through 21 elements. That's different than similar, but different actually from SB 9. The Willows proposal is a supportive housing project that it's in its first 30-day review. So it is a new project. It will be posted to the town's project page in the next couple of weeks. And there is no written ordinance yet for SB 9 that will be upcoming. And thank you for the feedback on labeling the maps. The staff report has the hyperlinks within the staff report. So members of the public can go look at the website and zoom into those maps as well.
Okay, before we return to committee discussion, we've got 2 more, I guess, questions from the public. So Monica Cheney, you'll go, and then Greg.
All right, Monica, you should be able to unmute on your end.
Hi, Monica here. Hopefully you can hear me. I wanted to really urge the committee together with planning and legal counsel to fully understand what SB 9 means in terms of our number of RENA units. I'd like to there's so much jargon that's getting thrown around. I'm going to give you a really concrete example. Let's say there's a property owner on Westridge or somewhere in Corte Madera. Tell me the lot. It almost is irrelevant because of SB 9's very small lot size requirements. They own say a 2-acre parcel or 2.5-acre parcel. Today they have 1 home. They then subdivide, which is purely a ministerial project. They go to the town and file paperwork and it's done. This owner now can add a second SB 9 unit onto their, let's call it pre-existing parcel where they had a home. They can then add ADUs for each of those 2 units on the existing parcel and potentially also add junior ADUs for each of those 2 homes. Then on the second parcel, the new parcel, if you will, they can have 2 SB 9 units and ADUs and junior ADUs for those SB 9 units. I will also note that it is vague in the law. It seems that the landowner could choose to make one of those SB 9 units go through discretionary review, which is the type of normal review we're used to in Portola Valley, and build a large, expensive home. So you might think, wow, that's a lot of additional units of housing. I'd call that an 8x multiplier. Two parcels suddenly, and there's an incentive to do this because, as we all know, you can sell a home in Portola Valley like that for upwards of $10 million. So I think there is an incentive here that we're not paying attention to, and there's an incredible amount of ADUs coming out of that, and a loss of total control of our town. and our planning ordinance, but
Okay,
I'll
thank you.
leave that for a whole nother discussion. If you could
Thank
just
you.
respond to that.
Through the chair, we're going to talk about SB9 a little bit in our staff report, but our interpretation is different than Monica's in terms of the number of units that could be developed through SB9. So if you want, we could talk about that a little bit later in the meeting, but we definitely have a different understanding of the law than what she was suggesting.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's going to be in the staff report at the very end of the meeting, right? Where we're going to touch on that. And I imagine this is going to be coming back into our discussion down the road.
A lot, yes.
A lot, yeah. Okay, thank you. Greg, go ahead.
Okay, Greg, you should be able to unmute on your end.
Greg?
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your 2 minutes will start now.
Okay, so we've heard some concern about fire risk and the allocation of these units, and we heard sort of a summary of the potential locations of the 253 units. So I just wanted to make an observation and about the ability to obtain fire insurance as a major concern for all of Portola Valley. I just want to make an observation about the allocation of those 253 RENI units across income levels. And I'm referring to Laura's presentation to the Ad Hoc Housing Committee on August 16th. So by my numbers, almost 50% of this 253 unit allocation is intended for families with incomes of less than $139,000. The low end is 52. So I guess I'll just make the observation. I'm fortunate enough to have my carrier renew my home insurance in Portola Valley, and I got a premium increase in my proposal of over $800 a year. And so I'm thinking about these 115 new housing units where the income levels are going to be range between $42,000 and $139,000, and think about whether the residents of those units will be able to afford home insurance from the outset. But given the trend lines of increasing premiums, which are clearly going to be associated with escalating losses incurred by the insurance industry, I'm just wondering, putting myself in a position of somebody earning less than a household income of less than $130,000, how they're even going to afford a premium increase of their fire insurance.
Okay, thank you. Great question. Laura, is this something that our consultants will be kind of weaving into the analysis?
We'll really have to think about these questions around insurance coverage. These are new, great questions.
Yeah.
Appreciate them.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I just want to check in with the committee. I think, is it possible to remove that image in the middle so we can all see each other? It's now 9:20. This was sort of the allotted time to end this discussion, but we haven't really had a chance to discuss. So unless there's any strong objection from people in the committee, I'd like to give this another, 10, 15 minutes so people can have more free-form discussion. Okay, thanks. So Bill, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, thank you. First, I just want to thank the staff. I thought the presentation on those scenarios was really well done and very helpful to organizing our thinking. If you are looking for direction as to which of these are most promising to pursue, it seems to me that example C there, perhaps with a somewhat expanded focus beyond the areas that are just circled, are going to be the most promising areas. To me, the idea of trying to disperse this across hundreds of potential units and guessing on the inclinations of particular landowners and so forth, not only is very speculative, but I think it's likely to exacerbate some of the safety and access issues. It seems to me that Alpine and Portola are natural access points in and out of town. They're the places where transportation can develop. They're the places where, to the extent housing is put together more closely, you can actually manage the fire risk in a way that would be hard to do if you disperse it over hundreds of different locations. And so my 2 cents would be that's the alternative to drill down on.
Good. Yep, jump in, Bob.
I'm going to be very fast because I too want to hear from people who haven't been speaking. First, I want to echo Bill's thanks to the staff because this is really complex material. I want to applaud you for your work in putting it together and delivering it so clearly. Is it possible to very quickly share my screen?
What is it? Oh, it's a question. What is it you want to share, Bob?
I would like to drill down on the map.
Which map?
The one we discussed, the very
Okay,
high fire
sure.
hazards.
Go ahead.
Map.
Yeah, go ahead. Is that all right, Laura, to share? That's fine by me.
I think Dylan or someone needs to enable,
Okay.
or maybe not. Maybe, oh, I'm sorry.
Can I make one comment? I agree, of course. But what I thought I heard Laura say is that is just the beginning of the maps that she's going to be reviewing. So I just don't want to get exclusively focused and burn up time of this meeting on one map when we're going to be looking at a host of them ultimately as part of this process. So just a thought.
Well, my technical difficulties might achieve your objective. My concern is that the map that was presented is very misleading. It gives a wrong impression of what the fire hazard is that we're facing.
Can we just take that feedback, Bob, and
Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm not. It turns out Zoom is smarter than I am, so
okay,
I can't show you.
Okay. So I'd like to hear really from people that haven't.
So let me make my other point, and that is, I fear a lot of great work went into this. I fear we really can't interpret these numbers until we know what the effect of SB9 will be. I can point to one person who spent the last half year of his life focusing on fire safety issues and feels strongly that public safety takes priority over personal interest. And yet, when this person looks at half their lot, they see a private aircraft. So there's going to be very strong financial incentive. I'm referring to myself, by the way. Strong financial incentive for people to take advantage of this. And so I expect that we'll see a lot of development based on the SB9. We really need to understand it in order to assess our arena prospects. Thank you.
I would agree with that. I think we all need to develop a better understanding. Janie, would be great to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm doing a lot of listening. One of the things I would like to ask for, just because I'm very visual, is a potentially overlay of all the maps. I know it's a little more tech savvy to do something like that, but to have an overlay map where we can see how they all work together. And then the other thing that I've just been thinking about after all of the fire impacts is a potential other evacuation routes that we could develop through our, open space areas, or are there any, emergency evacuation routes that we could develop roads for that purpose that are only open by, personnel in the case of an emergency? Or is there any possibility of creating something like that?
You're saying a map with evacuation routes?
Well, or develop new ones. I think of the property where one of our rangers lives, or one of, the open space areas, or, are there other ways where Portola and Alpine are our only options? Is there other, roads that would be only open in the event of an emergency? Even, egresses, or I don't know the right term for that, but something to consider.
Through the chair, I could quickly
Jeff.
respond to that. We
Jump in.
have in fact worked on with some property owners, private property owners. We've talked to Jasper Ridge about the potential of using that land. They've been they haven't been, well, they and our former fire marshal were not crazy about that because it is actually a fire hazard to drive cars across that land if it's really dry. We've talked to property owners up along in the hills, kind of along Skyline and Los Trancos area, about potential. It's tricky dealing with multiple private property owners, for example. But your point is well taken. We've tried to find more options for getting out of town. There's a handful of gates. They would be operated by emergency personnel. Like, you know, if there was a situation where we absolutely had to use one of them, they are a last resort. But we have a few gates that could allow people out of town that would be used as a last resort. And we've worked on getting some more over the years. It's complicated because you're dealing with private property owners who may or may not want to work with you on them. So,
Jeff, do you want to provide any comments on these different scenarios that were presented while you've got the floor?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I agree with the others that this was I'd really like this report in terms of laying out what, you know, these different options. I think we should probably just keep them all on the table for the moment. Because we're going to have to develop a pipeline, that pipeline analysis when we've got, when we fully absorb SB9, when we've, really dug down on what ADUs are going to look like, and we've gotten our final reports from our affiliated housing partners on what they realistically think they can deliver. I had a couple of comments, and one is, you got to realize this is a model with a lot of noise in it. And so we're plugging numbers and making assumptions and saying this is how many housing units we think can come out of this. The error bars on this are huge. So we're just going to have to, we have to be as realistic as we can about what we're assuming. And that's what 21 Elements is working towards, and trying to make sure that HCD has some buy-in as we move forward. We also have to recognize that we may overshoot this and we may undershoot it. It's far from, like I think Bill said, you're making a projection over hundreds of parcels. You don't know how many people are actually going to take it up. It's a fairly small sample size. Even if you consider the sample size 1,500 parcels in town, it's still a small sample size. So we don't know. There's just huge amounts of uncertainty around it. That's my first point. The second one is in the insurance question. We've been talking with people around the state for 6 months now about trying to get better visibility on, basically trying to get the insurance commission to talk to housing and community development and CAL FIRE about what's going to be insurable. Mayor Derwin, Town Manager Dennis, and I were on a call with Ricardo Lara, the insurance commissioner, back in May, and I said we're being asked to plan for housing that may be uninsurable. And I agree, it's a huge question mark. I think for the moment we have to assume that the housing we're planning for will be insurable. I don't know how else to proceed as this group moves forward, and then we have to sort of be prepared to deal with the consequences of the reality of what will happen as insurance policies do get canceled or not issued for certain areas. It's a huge question. I just don't have any good answers for it right now. And we're hoping to get more guidance from the state on questions like this going forward. So that's my comments at the moment. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Sue Crane, we'd like to hear from you. You got your hand up. Can you unmute, please? Sue, we can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Is a boggling amount of information that's come in. The maps are very, very valuable to me. I need to look at them. I continue to look at them. I wish I can see them in a larger context to see exactly where these properties are and understand about example C and understanding that this is a very valuable situation here, and that if we understand all these options that we can have, I'm extremely interested in the ADUs, the amount of ADUs and the affiliated housing, and what we can get from this amount, and what we can get from Ladera all the way to the other end of Portola Valley. We're asking ourselves to really look at this in a realistic way, but in a sense, we're sticking our fingers in the air and trying to get the sense of it. And I think the more we hear from the town and the consultants, I think the more it's going to get easier for us to get a picture of this. I can't believe I'm the only one who's confused on this.
No, I'm totally confused too. I completely agree with you. It's a lot of information to take in. And I mean, it's my sense is it's going to be this layering of information as we go forward. And this is just the very tip of the iceberg, just to kind of get us started thinking about these issues. Yeah.
And
I agree. Getting more information about all these other possibilities and layering that in is going to be super helpful.
It's like we need to know our past and we need to jump up in the grass to see the future. And for me, I need to stay focused exactly on what we're being asked. This is very important to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now Laura's looking and Adrian's looking for feedback. And that's kind of where we are. Yeah. Bill, do you have your hand up?
No, I already spoke.
Okay, thank you. Amy, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Great. Just a really quick suggestion. Would it be possible for us to get a copy of the presentation that talks about the scenarios? I think that was really, really helpful. I just want to echo the thanks to staff for just super work. I think in particular that presentation is going to have to, or is probably going to be a springboard for further discussion. And just so we're all on the same page about what the various scenarios are, understanding that there's, these are high level scenarios at this point, but that's my suggestion.
So Laura and Adrian, can we send out the maps to the committee or make them available on the website with a link to the committee?
So I was thinking what we would do after this meeting is you'll have access to the Zoom video. We'll post the PowerPoint presentation in a PDF. And I think we'll make a one-page summary of the different scenarios so that you can correspond those. And then we'll make sure that there's live links to the maps so that you don't have to jump around between the different sources. So that's what we'd be aiming for after this.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can go back.
Sorry, Jocelyn. Just one other thing. I love the concept of what Janie said about overlaying the maps, but they would be impossible to read, unfortunately. I mean, in fact, they have different borders even in some cases. I was fascinated by them. I was like kind of studying them and zooming in on them. But I agree with you. It is complicated to try to read those maps. I don't have anything.
You done, Amy? Thank you. That's great. Al?
Yeah, my comment is that, I mean, to the staff, I think that the presentation was very well done. I found it very informative, quite helpful. And it really gave me a feel for the process that we're gonna have to go through and the methodology to follow. I'm not ready to say anything about the different scenarios yet. To me, before we can start talking about scenarios, we need to factor in, what is the right fire map? What's going to happen with insurance? What's going to happen with affiliated units? What's the real number? So, any one of the scenarios might be the one that makes sense when we finally get enough information to start analyzing things. But I found that the presentation was quite useful.
Yeah, it was good to get us just thinking about these things, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Nicholas, I know you're on the planning commission. I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are right at this point. You willing to jump in? Did he leave?
Yeah, that's a no.
I'm also on the planning commission, so I can say something.
Oh, good, Anne. All right. Well, why don't you like to
No, I was very I was very pleased with this presentation because even though I'm on the planning commission, I was struggling to come up with ideas for rezoning that could help this RENA problem. So this, these definitely put some ideas on the table. So I'm really glad to see them. And I'm very glad that they have overlaid the financial or the some kind of likelihood that it would really get developed, because we can just do the numbers on lots, but I knew lots of those never would. So I'm very happy with this. And in my mind, everything should be on the table right now, right? Because we have so much other constraints to lay on top later. Things are gonna, some ideas are gonna go away. But definitely a good starting point and good to help us think about it.
Thank you. That's good to hear from you. Helen? I can see a hand, but oh, there you are.
I'm just on Zoom all day, so it just
Yeah, I get it.
Thank you. Yes, I'd love to see all the maps. Great presentation, but if I could, I'm just a person who needs to digest. The one initial comment I would make is, and I do appreciate that staff pointed this out. I would prefer to have affordable units spread out through town, although funding will be easier for low income developers closer to schools and commercial areas. So because I just don't want lower income units to be ghettoized. So I did want to comment on that, which I think is, they said example B and example C. So thank you.
And so I guess what we're saying, just to follow up on Helen's comment and to clarify, Laura, when we're talking about spreading out affordable housing throughout town, are we talking about spreading out multifamily buildings kind of throughout town?
Yes, we would need to, staff would need to think about this a little bit more, but it probably means spreading multifamily buildings throughout town and not just locating multifamily zoning on Alpine and Portola.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and so is that, you had suggested maybe researching that a bit more for future discussion, and that
Yeah,
is
it's sounding
something that
like
you
from
plan to
this,
do?
yeah, from
Yeah.
this discussion, we could look into that further.
Yeah, that seems like it'd be really interesting for people to consider too. Okay. Anybody else on the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Sarah Dorothy.
And so as part of the process, again, thinking about lower income residents, you know, we really will have to do something about improving transport. So if California is going to give mandates to, you know, spread housing around, then California should also do something about the appalling lack of public transportation. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just an obvious thing that needs to be resolved. So I don't know, obviously we don't have any control over that, but it would be nice if we could, you know, make some noise about it and see if we could make some changes in that regard.
Yeah, it seems like it's, you know, it would make it a lot more feasible for families to live throughout Portola Valley if they had ways of getting to work and school and all that, for sure. Okay, all right. Yeah,
See
Bob?
Amy's hand up.
Yeah, just one quick point that I hope I'm understanding correctly with regard to the scenarios. It's not a binary choice. I mean, right? We're not necessarily being asked to select one of the scenarios. It could be a combination of multiple scenarios in terms of just the questions about spreading housing, you know, throughout the community. You know, it could be because we opt for some combination of different scenarios. Is that everybody's understanding? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay, and Bob, you want to wrap it up here?
Very quickly, yeah. I just wanted to echo a comment that was made from the public at the beginning, something I'd never thought about, but I thought was interesting since we're thinking broadly, is annexing sounds a little bit aggressive, but is there a possibility that Ladera might become incorporated into Portola Valley? Our fates are certainly linked in terms of wildfire. What happens in Portola Valley, what happens in Ladera in terms of wildfire happens, affects the other, and certainly in terms of evacuation, which could be enhanced greatly if we were part of the same community. I don't know about the ramifications. I just thought that was really interesting, so I wanted to refer to it, and also wanted to thank the people, the public that called in, because wow, what a great set of insights and suggestions. So I wanted to encourage people to keep doing that. Thanks.
Yeah, hear, hear. Thank you, Bob. All right, well, that was great. I think we're getting our toes wet now in this stuff, and it's kind of fun. All right, I guess we want to go to public for any final comments.
Through the chair, you've already taken the public comment.
We're
so-
done. We're done.
Yeah.
Okay, we're just finishing our discussion. Okay,
Yeah.
good. We can move on to the next thing. I want to thank you also, Laura, Adrian, and the rest of you guys for pulling all that together. It's super helpful and really interesting. Well done. Okay, so the next thing on the docket here is informational presentation, and it's about regional housing needs allocation zoning target concept. All right.
So Adrian is going to walk you through some of this, and then Cara is going to tag in. So this is another complicated subject. So this is another thing we just wanted to get you thinking about so that we can come back to this later. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chair Swisher, as well. So yes, this presentation is an informational presentation, so I'm going to introduce the zoning target concept. So the key topics I'll cover is an expanded explanation of the housing element legal framework, and Town Attorney Silver is going to lead that. Then I'll discuss the annual housing element reporting requirement, as well as the state's no net loss law. Then I'll detail what a zoning target is, and finally we'll wrap up with how to think about a zoning target moving forward and ways available to build it into the town's housing element. So, Cara, if you wanted to get started.
Sure, thank you. So you might recall that we talked about some of these issues at the kickoff meeting, but they're very important issues. And as you're starting to really get involved in site selection and further concepts, I think it's important to keep the general framework in mind. So traditionally, the state has had several different tools for seeking housing element compliance. At one time, cities were not even producing housing elements. And so HCD, the Housing and Community Development Division of the state, developed several different tools and mechanisms for encouraging compliance with just turning in your housing element. So we have seen some of these remedies and tools used already. A very common, this is an incentive-based remedy, is limited access to a variety of different state funding options for towns that do not have certified housing elements. So the state is looking not only at whether the city or town turned in their housing element to the state, but whether that housing element has in fact been certified by HCD as complying with all of the requirements under state law. The other common remedy that the state has used is judicial enforcement actions. The law authorizes the Attorney General to bring enforcement actions, and those enforcement actions now have monetary penalties associated with them. So if a city does not turn in a housing element timely, or if the housing element does not contain a suitable number of housing units, satisfactory inventory units, or if the element does not comply with the new requirement to affirmatively further fair housing, the Attorney General actually has enforcement power to issue penalties for violation of those state law requirements. We've seen a very recent example over the past year where the Attorney General used this enforcement power against the city of Huntington Beach for not having a properly certified housing element. The Huntington Beach had turned in the housing element, but later adopted a housing policy that essentially took away some of the housing units that it had placed on the inventory. And so the Attorney General followed up with an enforcement action against the city. Also, civil lawsuits. Housing advocates or developers can file lawsuits against cities who are not in compliant with their housing element. I think you heard about a couple of years ago, Menlo Park had not submitted a housing element for 2 cycles, and a group of housing advocates sued the city of Menlo Park, and ultimately that case settled. The city of Menlo Park paid a very large attorney fee to the advocates who had filed that lawsuit. They were also required to submit an updated housing element in a very short period of time under that settlement agreement. If a case goes to court, the court has very broad discretion to issue a variety of penalties, including, of course, an order to comply with a housing element law, but also, more importantly, the suspension of all local control over all building permits. So not only building permits relating to new housing, but building permits related to additions, to remodels of existing housing, to building permits related to commercial development, building permits related to retail development, just really taking over all local control over building permits. Also, the court has the ability to approve housing developments that are filed as a proposed development with the town. And if the town does not have a certified housing element, then a developer can come in, file an application for a multi-family development, and the court in this situation would have the power to grant that permit. And then, of course, these actions also have penalties and attorney's fees associated with them, regardless of whether the action is filed by the Attorney General or by a housing proponent or a developer. And I've listed on this slide, in addition to Menlo Park, there have been a series of cities that have been sued either by housing advocates or by developers. Next slide, please. One of the more recent tools that we have seen the HCD use as a method for achieving housing element compliance is a carryover of any unfilled RHNA units that were not constructed in the previous cycle. So if a city had an allocation of, say, 500 units and they built 350 units, the unbuilt units of 50 would be carried over to the next housing cycle, and the city would have to provide in the next housing element cycle their current allocation in addition to any unfulfilled RHNA units that were not built in the previous cycle. Also, HCD has the authority to shorten the time periods for the housing element cycles. Housing element cycles are typically 8 years, and HCD has been shortening the housing element cycle, requiring towns to go through this process more frequently in a 4-year cycle if they do not comply with housing element law. Next slide. Also, what we have seen, this is a growing trend. We used to always say that a housing element was a planning document. It is something that traditionally has not had a consequence for not building the units. The towns themselves are not required to build the units. However, what we are seeing is other legislation that has been layered onto the existing structure to, again, incentivize, encourage, it's a carrot and stick approach to encourage cities to facilitate the construction of these units, either by market rate developers or by nonprofit affordable housing providers, or through regulations and ordinances that require the set aside of certain units for affordable units. And these are called inclusionary housing ordinances. And so while it was the case traditionally that there was no consequence for even failing to submit a housing element, we are seeing that the trend in the law move so that it's becoming now, it's even apparent that the state is essentially requiring and strongly encouraging the construction of actual housing units under housing element law. So the way that the state has been doing that is recently the state has adopted a reporting requirement. So every year, each of the cities and counties, of course, must report on all of the housing units that have been permitted in the city during the previous year. And that reporting must be done by affordability levels. And every year, the HCD will publish a list of cities that have either satisfied or not satisfied their pro rata allocation of the 8-year cycle during that reporting period. Another mechanism that the state has adopted is a no net loss policy that was recently adopted as SB 166. And I believe that Adrian will be talking more about that in her presentation. But basically what that requires is that cities must at all times have a sufficient set of units listed in their inventory to satisfy the allocated RHNA. And if a project comes forward and is on the inventory and files an application for a project with less than the number of units that were established in the inventory, then under SB 166, the city is required to actually find a new housing site and add that to the inventory to ensure that at all times the RHNA number is satisfied. What cities, the best practice has been is to include a sort of buffer to allow for additional units that do that are not built at the levels of that are specified in the housing inventory. And then finally, we have seen that HCD is referring jurisdictions to the Attorney General for a series of different violations, not only related to the housing element, but also related to the housing programs and policies that are articulated in the housing element. So an example of this would be if your housing element said that you would adopt a program that encourages more construction of ADUs. And if HCD determined that the city actually never adopted that ordinance, HCD has the ability now to refer that issue to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General can file an enforcement action requiring the city to implement that policy to encourage additional ADUs in this jurisdiction. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to briefly introduce the topic of SB 35. This is another recent tool that the state has, again, to incentivize cities and towns to adopt policies that actually facilitate the construction of the housing the housing units that are planned for in the RHNA. And what SB 35 says is that if the cities do not actually build the prorated allocation of the housing during that 1 year reporting requirement, then then it is possible for developers to seek what is called an SB 35 application to build multifamily housing or to build a housing development project with a ministerial approval without any discretionary approvals by the town. So this is another mechanism for is essentially adding some more teeth to the regulations that we currently have. So with SB 35, again, we'll talk more about this in detail. It's a very complicated piece of legislation, and there have been several recent amendments to it. But basically with SB 35, every year now, during the reporting period, and the reporting period is April 1 for the previous fiscal year, the HCD takes these annual reports of all of the housing that has actually been permitted by an agency and constructed by actual developers, and establishes 3 different lists. So the first list contains cities that comply with their allocated RHNA portion. The second list contains cities that have complied with the moderate income portion of the RHNA allocation, but who have not complied with the lower income RHNA numbers. And it's generally the lower income numbers that are more difficult to construct. And then the third category of cities includes those cities that have complied with the, who have built the lower income, but who have not complied with the market rate units. And if we can go to the next slide.
I think we're getting into my slides now. Yes.
Oh, we don't have the chart. Okay. No problem. So I will tell you that Portola Valley falls under the second category, which is, and we are along with 225 or 224 other jurisdictions, which, let's see here, which have constructed the moderate income units for our 1 year reporting, or the market rate units for the 1 year reporting requirements, but have not constructed all of the portion of the lower income. And as a result, under SB 35, if a developer requests a project that contains at least 50% of the units, if they are affordable, then that project must be approved by right under SB 35. So this is a I would call it an unlikely scenario in Portola Valley to have a developer propose a project that was affordable to 50% lower income households. But it is one of those, regulatory teeth that we are seeing come up, and we would expect that this threshold will change over time, that the state will ratchet up these requirements. And this is really the first pass at the types of penalties that we are seeing for actually not constructing the RHNA component of the housing element. And so that is the trend that we are seeing, and wanted to make sure that you all were aware of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cara. So Cara touched on this earlier about HCD requiring annual reporting. So one of the key aspects of implementing the housing element is to report annually to HCD on how the town is meeting its RHNA numbers. So the annual report includes net new unit tracking, and it's directly compared against the assumptions that the town has included in its housing sites inventory to check on how the town is following its housing policies as well. And we also state progress on any of our plan for housing programs. So again, Cara introduced this in her part of the presentation, so I'll just add a little bit on to her comments. So what I want to mention here is that how we track our new housing units to ensure no net loss is we're comparing every time a given development comes in the door and comes into the city, we compare that given development project proposal against how our housing element has planned for that particular site. So we're trying to compare the units directly, and we're trying to compare the affordability levels directly. So what happens if there's a shortfall? Jurisdictions must be able to identify other sites that are available to make up for the difference. So if they don't have any other sites available, they must rezone another site or sites within 180 days after a given development is approved to make up for that shortfall. So how do we ensure we have enough sites at all times to avoid a reactionary 180-day site rezone process? What we do is we build in a zoning target into the housing element that gives us a little wiggle room. So the zoning target is a plan to include additional sites above our baseline assigned RHNA number. Again, if a given development project or several get approved at a reduced housing density or with fewer units or with a lower number of low-income units than the town has planned for in its housing element, we'll face a shortfall. So a zoning target, or a buffer you can call it, is prudent. So how can we think more about this RHNA zoning target? Think of it as a budget for housing units. What we want is to achieve our RHNA number and see 253 new units built over the course of this upcoming housing cycle. So that'll be from 2023 to 2031. But like any good budget, it's prudent to plan for the unexpected and put aside an emergency fund in case things don't go to plan. So despite our very best efforts at comprehensive market analysis and precision planning for our RHNA numbers, something might happen or not happen that we haven't anticipated, and we could fall short on our RHNA numbers. The below market rate RHNA numbers in particular are especially vulnerable to a shortfall, since often a given development project might not propose the exact number of units and mix of affordability the town has planned for in its housing element. So enter the zoning budget of backup sites and units that we can draw from if we need to. So with this understanding of the zoning target, how do we think about this concept moving forward? It's about building some flexibility into the town's housing sites inventory. It's planning for some contingency in the housing budget so that we actually get to the units we're planning for. Despite our very best planning, there's a multitude of variables in play, all of which we couldn't possibly anticipate at a given point in time. So we are still in the introductory phase of this concept as we've just begun working on our housing site strategies. So we're going to continue to discuss it further. How can we build in our zoning target? So the most common way to do this is including more sites than the minimum necessary RHNA assigned number we have. Other ways are to be conservative about the actual capacity of sites in our inventory, or rezone sites to a higher density than we actually need, knowing that some of these sites will be entitled at lower densities. Overall, zoning targets give jurisdictions the needed flexibility to stay in compliance with the housing element law. So I just wanted to provide an illustrative scenario that shows how easily a jurisdiction can start to fall behind on its affordable units based on one development project. So for example, a jurisdiction listed a 1 acre site and zoned it for 20 units per acre in its housing element and assumed that all 20 units would be affordable. A few years after adopting the housing element, the jurisdiction gets a proposal for 20 units on the site, but only 5 of those are affordable. So in this case, unless the jurisdiction has a buffer to back them up to fill in that shortfall, there would be a shortfall of 15 affordable units, and the jurisdiction would need to rezone or show additional capacity somewhere else. So that wraps my presentation on this particular zoning target concept. We just welcome any questions at this point, any clarifying questions we can help with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cara, Adrian, Laura. That was very informative and enlightening. Okay, so yeah, go ahead, Sue, you got your hand up. Oh, Sue, you gotta unmute, yeah.
Okay.
Gets you every time, right?
It's yes. So wondering about our relationship with the states and what we do and how it turns out in our town. And this is about ADUs. So ADUs get built. We permit them. Now, some of them are used for family, grandmother units, help, and they are low cost. Some of them are not. Some of them are put out on the open market. How does the town respond to the state about all the ADUs that we have? It doesn't appear that all the ADUs are accepting of being low-cost housing. How do we do that? I've always wondered that.
This is a great question, Sue. And it's a question we receive from a lot of people. And the basic concept is there's a study that's done usually on a regional basis that looks at ADUs and how they are rented and at what affordability levels. And then there's a report, and then we take those assumptions from that report and we apply it when we are going through the process of permitting ADUs and reporting on them. So this is, it's an imperfect process. It will be improved with this housing element cycle, but we are going to talk about this in some detail at an upcoming meeting. But for tonight, there's a set of assumptions that we use to assign them into income categories.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. And I'll be very curious to understand it better. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, so moving down the line here, so, Sarah Dorahy.
Every time. Yeah, there it is. So then what are we thinking of in terms of the buffer number? Phone ringing. How many additional units are we going to have in our buffer? Sorry.
So a lot of organizations apply a percentage buffer. And so those percentages can vary. but we would like to think more about our particular context here and present more detailed information to the committee in the future when we've had the chance to think about it a little bit more. So a lot of you, if you're following other communities or happen to read, some people are talking about a percentage buffer, and we're trying to fine tune that a little bit more and think of it more as a target and try to be creative about how we can reach it.
Is there kind of a rule of thumb, Laura, for San Mateo County towns that you know of?
There's a range of what's considered a best practice. There's a lot of people going in the range of 20% or 30% buffer, so additional units on top of their RENA. But people have very different physical context that they're dealing with and different range of units and different zoning categories. So we want to be thoughtful before we just take the best practice. We want to make sure that that makes sense for us.
And just to clarify, when you're doing the buffer, are you allocating, you know, if it's whatever, 40 extra units, is it divided out across the different income levels?
Yes, it often is, but that's another area where we may want to be more thoughtful. So if we think that there's going to be more market rate units, then perhaps we don't want as much of a buffer on the market rate units because we think that those are going to come through. Perhaps a higher buffer on the lower income units may be appropriate for us. So some kind of tiered system, perhaps. So these are some of the things we're thinking about and checking in with colleagues and our consultants and the attorneys. So we wanted to have a chance to think about it more and present more information to you.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. Bill, you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you. Just a brief comment, which is, I think the underlying assumption for the prior presentation is we're framing the problem as how do we comply with our minimal requirement in a way that we think complies with the law and that reduces our enforcement risk to an acceptable level. I think we have a different kind of problem here, which is if you assume that is as reflected in the state policy here, we actually have a housing crisis and a supply problem, we might want to look at the problem from the other perspective, which is how much housing could we accommodate subject to all of this? In other words, don't aim to solve for the minimum, aim high. That's a contrarian point of view, I recognize, but I think it is a different way of thinking about the problem, and I'd encourage us to keep an open mind about that.
Okay, that's thought-provoking. Thank you. Anne.
Yeah, going back to more the minimum requirements, this question's for Cara. One of the penalties could be suspension of local control on all building permits. Are there any examples of when the state has done that? And, you know, what does it look like? Did they just approve any old ugly apartment building, or were they really slow at remodel permits?
Right. So I am not aware of a Northern California example. There have been, for whatever reason, more enforcement actions in Southern California, but the law is very clear that it talks about the suspension of local authority over all building permits. So it certainly, if a judge thinks that there needs to be some incentivizing in Portola Valley, I would think it would be, you know, a very easy target would be local remodel permits and additions to existing houses. That is something that would grab the attention of the town council, because that really impacts the residents. So that's why I mentioned that particular example.
Good.
Okay. It looks like we're done with the committee questions. Do we still have, yeah, there's still people there. Any questions from our friends in town? I see Monica's hand is up.
Okay, Monica, you should be able to mute yourself. Can you hear me?
Hi, all. I'm still here. I thought we were going to get to the topic of SB9. So
We're covering SB9 in the staff update at the end of the meeting, which is the next section and last section.
Okay, so there's no public discussion then, or?
It's really just staff committee reports.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, I
I
guess
it's been said, sorry to interrupt, but I think Laura and others have mentioned, we are going to come back to SB9 more than one time in the future because we acknowledge we need to really understand it.
Okay, I think that would be extremely useful.
Including running it through scenarios, as we look at different scenarios.
Yeah, I think it's at least a 4 or 8x multiplier on the current lots in Portola Valley, potentially. And there's a lot of issues associated with that. But since that's apparently not on the agenda, although I thought we were going to get to it, I wanted to just say from a really high level, as someone who's sticking around on the third hour here, this discussion, it's really frustrating from the community. I think you've heard several people say it's hard to do this by Zoom as a community member. You don't get to see anybody else. You don't know who else is on the call. I know that several other people have said that. Also, the comments are not available in the meeting minutes, which is challenging. But the other thing is, at the beginning of this meeting, there was a discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I brought this up on the very first meeting of the committee. And I respect all of you for putting your time in. I know it's exhausting to sit, on a Zoom for 3 hours on a Monday night. And I really value that, as well as the staff time. But it does feel like there is a selection criteria for having been on this committee that I think does not sync with the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was not permitted to be on the committee because I opposed the concept of having a 253 unit RENA number. I'm sympathetic to below market rate housing. I am extremely opposed to the state of California telling us to basically defenestrate our general plan. And I think that's what's happening both between the RENA allocation and SB9. And you put them together and it's shocking. And so I would really just ask you to not sort of cut people off. I feel like there's a lot of that when there's stuff being said that people aren't enjoying. I see that people have all dropped off, so I guess I'll quit. But
okay.
This is a difficult thing to participate in as a person in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So I just want to say again that the staff is going to touch on the SB9, what was covered on the SB9 discussion and SB10 at the town council meeting on October 13th. So they are going to touch on that. And that's just the beginning of our understanding it on this committee. Okay, Rita Gomez.
Okay, Rita, you should have the ability to unmute yourself. Can you hear me?
Somehow it's turned me into a panelist. I have no idea. But my question is, here we are in this beautiful town that was incorporated in 1964, and we're reacting to things. This town is full of brilliant minds that can actually plan something. And what I haven't been hearing is, what's the plan? What's our 10-year plan? What's our 20-year plan? What's our 30-year plan? What's our infrastructure plan? I hear us having to react. I don't know who's going to be buying all this land that we then have to, make into these little buckets to react to what the state is asking us to do. But how about for the 4,500 people that are already in this town? We would love to have some better infrastructure. We would love to have some better Wi-Fi and sewage issues and not have to, there was another blackout last week for half the town. And then the week before that, there were over 200 homes that didn't have electricity for 13 hours. Let's work on those things when we're talking about the housing element, and let's plan for the people that are here. And then, we can fill in the spaces and work together as a town and not just react to what the state is asking us to do for people that may or may not live in this town at this time. I believe that we need to be a whole lot more diverse in this town, but we need to have a plan, not just react to what someone is telling us. Oh, if you don't do this, you're going to have a timeout and it's going to cost you this much money. This is a good town. It's a beautiful town. And this is why I'm here with my family. And this is why all of us are here. But let's do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Okay, Christy Corley, your hand is up.
Hey, Christy, you should be able to unmute yourself. Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can unmute. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I am concerned that RENA Cycle 5, we did not implement an evacuation plan and routes. We are in the last year of the 8-year cycle, and we do not have an evacuation plan, and that's part of the housing element. So, as far as what could happen to us, for RENA 5 cycle, much less RENA 6 cycle. So I'm really concerned about that. We have about 13, 14 gates that can be unlocked. I'm not sure a lot of our residents know where those gates are. So I sent a map from Truckee, California that I thought was excellent, and I'm not sure what anybody's done with it. So I'm just, if we're talking about RENA Cycle 6 and we're planning for that, well, let's make sure that our citizens are safe for RENA Cycle 5, which ends in 2022. I'm also thinking an ordinance might be nice for a pre-application process, which I've seen in some other cities, that actually have an applicant come to the town council and just do a pre-application before they spend a lot of time on drawings and so on. So the residents and the council and we all could see it rather than it be behind closed doors. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, it looks like that's it from public comments. Bill Kelly, I see your hand up. Is that from before, or do you have a new question? Comment?
No, that's from before. I seem to have trouble
Yeah,
taking my hand down. Okay.
No
Thank you.
worries. All righty. Okay, so I think we can now move on to the next section, right, Laura, which is staff and committee reports. And that's 10 minutes allocated. And then we're going to do approval of minutes and then we adjourn.
Reminder that I've been waiting patiently to raise my administrative issues, which I wanted to do at the beginning, but you suggested that I combine it with number 5.
Okay, thank you for the reminder.
Thanks.
Okay, so for the staff report, there's 2 things, actually 3 things that we wanted to go over. So the first one is there's been questions that have come to us about what are the topics? What are the things that this committee is going to talk about? So we're working on just like a little simple graphic of those things so that the committee members and the public can track that. We also have an overall schedule for this effort that came out with the community meeting last week. So we'll be publishing that overall schedule along with this. It'll be kind of a graphic or a diagram that'll go over some of the main topics. So you're familiar with these, but members of the public, there's still 9 of you there. And just as a quick refresher, several things we've already talked about, but we'll be talking more about always about housing element law, right? We can never get away from that. We'll be taking a deeper dive into accessory dwelling units. So this is what Sue was talking about. How is the affordability assigned? What is the town data? What do we think the future ADU production is going to be? We're going to look at affiliated housing in more depth, evaluation of the current program, expansion or revision, thinking about what our partners may want to do in the future, who might else want to join the affiliated housing program. We're going to talk more about affordable housing programs in general. So how do we keep those units as affordable? We talked about this quite a bit last month, but that will continue to come up. We're going to talk about the interaction with the other general plan elements. And we've been thinking we need to think about the crossover areas or any ripple effects that may happen between the different elements, and always be mindful of the general plan overall. We're going to continue this conversation around the housing sites inventory. So this will go on through several meetings, working through this level of detail. We anticipate having a dedicated, like, real discussion time around wildfire safety, bringing you that information, bringing experts to talk to you, giving materials in advance and at the meeting so you can start to really understand this complicated topic. So that will have a dedicated item, and then it'll also sort of weave through all of the discussions that we're having. We'll talk to you about geology and seismic considerations. We have great mapping on that already, always opportunity to improve. And then farther down the line, we'll be looking at implementing these concepts and what would zoning code amendments look like as we start putting these items into implementation. So I want to keep, I know it's hard for all of you that just get these little pieces. So we want to try to stay connected to the overall. So we'll be publishing that schedule and that list of topics soon on the website, and we'll let you know when that's up. And then second, we wanted to talk about SB9 in the big picture. So last week at the October 13th Town Council meeting, Cara gave the majority of a presentation and I gave a little bit of it as well. So I encourage everyone who's interested to look both at the written staff report, but also watch the Zoom if you're interested and have time. Like, kind of jump ahead to that part of the meeting and watch it if you're interested, because quite a bit of great questions and discussion and public comment came out of the Zoom meeting that you may be interested in. Of course, there'll be council minutes that will also be published, so you can take a look at those. So there's major components of SB9 that we want people to generally be aware of. And we also recognize that while we have a working interpretation right now, some of these things are going to be subject to development. So we're going to have more information as this develops. So some primary aspects of SB9 are removal or limitation on discretionary review. So that could impact our ASCC review process. So that's a big one. The next one is to allow lot splits through a ministerial process on many or most properties. We're working through some of the contours around some of the safety considerations, but that is a major development, is to have lot splits that could be approved at a ministerial level. Then it generally, SB9 generally allows an additional unit on most single family lots. There are some exceptions, and it allows the town to create objective zoning standards, including things like limiting the unit size. So we mentioned this earlier around objective standards, talking about the building envelope and what things can look like. So those are things that we do have within our discretion to create objective zoning standards to a certain point, so that we can't, the languages physically preclude an 800 square foot, what people are starting to call an SB9 unit. So to Monica's earlier question about how many units and what does this mean, we don't know how broadly this would be employed across the community, but we can tell you our interpretation about how many units would be allowed under this legislation. And so if people take advantage of the lot split provision, then the town does not have to allow ADUs on those properties. So what is currently one main house, maybe one main house and an ADU now, you could do a lot split, and then you could build 2 units on each of those lots for a total of 4. So that's how we interpret the law in terms of the multiplier. So going from 1 unit to 4 units. Then if people don't do a lot split, you're allowed to have, this is the terminology is we're still developing it, but I think of it as like the main house, the ADU, a new SB9 unit, that's the new part. And then a junior ADU is already currently allowed under state law, but the junior ADU has to be within one of the other 2 units. And I think that would have to be within either like the main house or the SB9 unit. So in that case, you would have a total of 4 units if you count the junior ADU, where under today's laws, you would probably be allowed to have 3 units. So this is definitely a change, but it's not our interpretation that the multiplier is times 8. The legislation changed a lot as it was being developed, and quite a few rules came towards the end of the legislative process so that there wouldn't be this really big multiplier of like times 8 units. So that is a very high level of a complex thing. So you probably want to take a look at the staff report, and more will be coming both from us, from Kara's office and myself, as well as through all of our colleagues and peers, other planning directors and other city attorneys. So in terms of next steps, the council formed a subcommittee of the mayor and the vice mayor to work with staff on this issue. The legislation goes into effect in January 1st. So we're going to pursue it through an emergency ordinance that we anticipate bringing back to council on December 8th. So that's the broad contours, and we'll provide additional information as we continue to work through it. And the third thing that I wanted to mention, most of you are aware of this, but we had a community-wide meeting last Thursday. So the video of the main session will be posted shortly, and there'll be, additional information that comes out of that. So it was well attended and overall successful. And so we appreciate those of you that were able to attend and those members of the public that were able to attend. We really appreciate that participation. So that is my staff report for this evening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on there that I wasn't able to attend. Sarah had shared with me the slides from 21 Element that they had presented at the community forum. And I guess I've asked Adrienne if she could push that out to everybody in the committee just so that they have them. Because they were.
Yeah, we'll post it on the website, and we'll send you all an email when that's posted so that you can easily access it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, because they were informative. Okay, great. Thanks for the overview. Now we're gonna, Bob, you got a couple minutes to raise an administration issue that you've got.
I'd like to ask questions about the presentation, if that's all right.
Okay.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for both presentations, and I particularly appreciated the preview of what's coming and the clear explanation of SB9. That's really nice. My understanding of SB9, the legislature was very clear about not encroaching on the town's authority and responsibility to protect safety, and in fact, there's language in the bill that allows areas to be excluded as needed for public safety, provided that there are written objective criteria by which to make that assessment of safety. And so I understand last week at the town council, staff received direction from the town council about preparing this ordinance that should be in place by January 1st. I'm wondering what direction the staff received about addressing this issue of excluding areas as needed for public safety.
So that public safety exception is something that is in the state law, and the council is always very protective of local control. And so, of course, we as staff would incorporate that state law provision in any ordinance that we draft. It's a different provision than in the ADU legislation. It also is a provision that has been interpreted in other contexts because it's language that we have seen in other state legislation. And so in order to take advantage of that particular exception, the town needs to have a very specific objective health and safety criteria that is published in advance in order to take advantage of that. And so we will be developing that objective criteria as well as part of this urgency ordinance
Thank you.
process.
Thanks.
And to say it in simple terms, we think about this all day, every day. We're trying to think of as many ideas as we can and the best possible approaches. So that's what we're going to keep doing.
Great. Any other questions on the updates from Laura? Okay, I guess we'll take the comments from people in town. I'll go to Bob for a couple of minutes and wrap up the meeting, okay? So Rita Gomez.
Okay, Rita, you should have the ability to unmute yourself on your end.
Yes, I heard the report about the meeting that had happened last Thursday, and I attended. And one of the things I was concerned about, and I've talked to other people that participated in that public meeting for Portola Valley, and the breakout room that I attended, there were a lot of different topics that were talked about by the residents that were in that meeting, but then the reporting out when everyone was back out of the breakout rooms was very different from what was said in our breakout room. And Laura had just said that the video is going to be available, but I would really like the video from the other, or at least the transcripts from the other breakout rooms, because I've talked to other people that were in different breakout rooms, and they also said that the person that was reporting out from their breakout rooms said something very different that did not reflect the conversation that was in their particular breakout room. So I hope that we're able to get transcripts from what is said by the residents, not restated by the reporter person that was out, which was not a resident that reported out from those breakout rooms. If that's possible, I strongly encourage for the residents to be able to receive that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Dana Breen.
Dana's hand went down. Dana, did you still want to speak? Okay. All right. Wait, you should be able to unmute on your end.
Got it,
Can you hear
got
me?
it.
Okay.
Got it, yes?
Yes.
Hello.
Hey, I'm on the clock. I really am dittoing what Rita just said. I think it's very important that the residents get to hear what happened in the breakout sessions, because that's the voice of the people. And somehow in all of this, we are missing the voice of the people. So please make sure that that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Christy Corley. There's two Christy Corleys.
Right, Christy, you should be able to unmute on your end. Can you hear me?
Thank you. One comment I have regarding SB 9 is the 3-year owner occupancy. After a lot splits, the owner needs to occupy one of the lots for 3 years. How can Portola Valley write teeth into this law or ordinance that you may write so the law is not vague in our city? We do not want developers buying both halves and having the resident leave. Now, after 3 years, what could happen with SB 10 is they can still come in, buy a lot, and put 10 units on it. So in 7 to 20 years, we're really going to see a lot of changes in this town. So if we do have 1,700 lots, times 4 on each lot, if all lots split, you're at 68,000 lots, correct? We won't get to that, but that's the max it could go. So just, it's something to think about. Number 2 is if 50% of the houses in Portola Valley are on septic and the septic is maxed, then, and it exempts, SB 9 exempts lot splits for lots that have a max on their septic. So you can't just go put an ADU if your septic can't take the sewage for the ADU. So that is an exemption, just like historical lots are an exemption. And if they're, I think indigenous history on a lot would be an exemption. So I just wanted to point that out. And I am noticing people going in and out of this meeting that were appointed to the meeting. So I'm a little concerned about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, through the chair, one point, SB 10, I didn't mention in the interest of time, but SB 10 is optional. The town is not required to pursue the SB 10 provisions, and the council did not indicate any interest in pursuing those provisions at this time. So there's no aspect of SB 10 that we're required to do that would be forced upon us.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. All right, Bob, we got like a minute because we're really tired.
Perfect. Two questions. One is, call me a dinosaur, but I'm having a very hard time navigating the PDFs associated with the general plan. And I was wondering if the chair would ask the staff to provide hard copies of the entire general plan with all elements and provide them to all committee members in through binders. So we have access to those to facilitate us understanding the general plan and how the different elements relate. That's one question.
Can I just say, I would think anybody that wants something like that, I would encourage you to just contact Laura and Jeremy and make a request and see if they can accommodate that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second question is really for Adrian. I sent you an email with a letter to the town council CC to this committee and asked you to distribute it to committee members and include in the public agenda. And I don't see it in the public agenda packet. And I was wondering if you received that and, if there was a process issue or what happened there.
We received the email. It was distributed to this committee with the other public comments. The cutoff is noon on the date of the meeting. And in terms of putting it into the packet, we'll have to establish a procedure for what goes into the packet for this committee. So we just need to work with the chair on doing that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great if there's a procedure, because I know lots of people have comments, and it'd be great if that was publicly available for people. Those are my administrative issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we just need to do approval of minutes. So I guess those were included with our packet. What do we need to do to approve? We have to have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
A question before we vote, please. I hope you're not going to boot me off the committee for too much airtime, but I actually had two questions about.
We're going to put that to a vote.
Be careful what you ask for.
All right.
I'll just leave now. Okay, I think these are fast. One is, what's the process for making changes? I mean, what happens? Does a staff member take notes and it gets typed in later, or does whoever's doing the next minutes listen to the audio and make corrections? I'm just wondering what that process is. And then I've got a second question too.
It depends on the scope of the comments.
Okay.
But sometimes we go back and listen if the decision-making body or this committee just wants to change a line or a word, then we just go back and make that revision and then finalize them.
Okay. My other question is the nature of the minutes. I found them to be so sparse as to be uninformative, and I want to read one sentence. Committee members discussed the presentation and posed various comments and questions. There's no content there. There's no idea what was discussed and who said what. In contrast, the Trails and Paths Committee and the Ad Hoc Wildfire Preparedness Committee, their minutes are show the content. They show what members of the public spoke and what their comments were. And so I was just wondering, why is there the difference, and are we going to see a fuller set of minutes in this topic that is so important?
Given the importance of the topic, we thought a lot of people may wish to watch the Zoom videos. So that's why we included the timestamp so that people could watch the portions of the videos that are relevant to them. We have received feedback in the past that some of the comments don't accurately reflect what people have said when we try to summarize them. I mean, we did this a couple times before, right? Where we receive comments back and then people want to fine tune the wording. We didn't want to misrepresent what anyone says on such an important topic. So we wanted to refer to the video where people can hear that for themselves. So that was staff's intent in the manner that the minutes are presented for your consideration.
Certainly the Wildfire and the Trails and Path Committee they do include that content.
Yeah.
They do
Well,
include,
I'd say,
can tell what was said.
I've spent a lot of time over the years doing minutes, and you can do a transcript level of minutes, and it is usually a complete waste of taxpayer money. We now at this point have summary minutes, which tell you the subject matters that were discussed. We provided you with Zoom links where you can listen to the actual words. The idea of creating an intermediate level where people whose judgments about this will be second guessed create summaries strikes me as a really low value exercise.
I've actually found them to be very helpful when I'm trying to track down information. I found it to be incredibly helpful. So I think it's a loss that we don't do it. I encourage people to keep an open mind. I'm clearly not going to convince the group right now, but I do think it's a weakness, and it contrasts sharply with the other ones.
Thank you, Bob, for raising that for us. We'll continue to think about that, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
So we have a motion and a second. You should
Yeah.
technically be open for public comments.
Okay. So we'll go to Monica Cheney. Got your hand up?
All right, Monica, you should have the ability to unmute on your end. You there, Monica?
It looks like she dropped off.
Hi, it's Monica here. Just so you know, when members of the public tried to comment, there's like a really long delay cycle before we can unmute. So it's really difficult to talk. In any case, I would like to just follow up to what Bob Turcott just said. Members of the public have been pleading repeatedly tonight and at the last meeting to be able to know who else is on the call and to have the meeting minutes show the comments from the public. And I don't know why in the world we would not do that. I mean, this is difficult enough as it is by being on Zoom in a sort of, if you're a member of the public, please keep in mind, you're in a dark room. You have no idea who else is out there. And so please, I don't think it's asking too much to get these things transcribed. Thank you.
Thank you. Rita Gomez.
Okay, Rita, you should have the ability to unmute yourself now. It seems like Zoom is getting a little laggy on my end. Let's see. Okay. All right. See if that worked now, Rita. Are you able to mute on your end?
The first thing I'd like to say is this whole thing about me then becoming a panelist and changing my screen. It's you know, I mean, I guess I'm a young 60 over here, but for people in our community that are a little bit older and might think that something is wrong with their screen because this isn't an unusual prompt for Zoom, I find it quite annoying. So if that could be changed for future meetings, but I think this particular meeting is very important. I appreciate the time for the residents that are on this committee, their personal time that they could be actually doing something else. The employees that are here, I'm sure your days are being balanced out with these extra hours, but I would really like to see the transcripts and hear the voices of the people in this town that pay the taxes and have a say in this, because the work you're doing is very important and it's going to change this town, just like the general plan in 1964 changed the nature of this town. So please, I am not the only one that's asking for transcripts and to see the people that are here. It sounds like we're not going to be back into the schoolhouse a minimum till February when we can actually see who's in the room. But, you know, there are a lot of people that have views about what's going on right now, and it would really benefit the other people in the town to be able to see each other in the community. I know we stopped doing chat because there was a couple of meetings where people just took over the chat and were saying rude things, but that's been a long time. So how about we try that again? It's almost Christmas time. Let's try this again with the chat and being able to see each other on at least Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you all for expressing your concerns and your asking your questions and making comments. We appreciate your participation a lot. We hear what you're saying, okay? Okay, everybody, I think it's a wrap, right?
We have on the minutes, we have a motion, I believe, from Bill Kelly, and I think we have a second from Al Sill. So you should take a vote on the minutes.
Okay. We don't do roll call for that. We just raise hands.
Have to do a roll call on everything.
Got to do.
Should do a roll call.
Hey, before
Okay,
we do
so
that-
committee members, ready? Here we go.
Sorry, one thing before we do that, we've got comments in the chat, one from me and one from Janie. We should probably mention that they're there.
Okay, so Sarah Dorahy, can we list all attendees in the chat? Yeah, and then Janie Ward, I have used something called Searchy where you can upload a video and they transcribe it. Maybe we could use it to do this. Perhaps the chair can read the names of community members attending. So is it the committee members, you cannot see who's in the
So if I can interject here a little bit just for background.
Yeah.
We have the same problem at every single meeting, as do other communities and boards and nonprofits and everybody who uses Zoom. When you're using Zoom with a panel like this, the people who are calling in, it's a limitation of the software.
Got
So
it.
it's not, you know, we would
Nothing
love
we
for
can
everybody
solve.
to see it, but we can't change Zoom. And this is the platform that is commonly used by a lot of organizations, including, as I've pointed out, PVNU and others in town. It's just the way the software works. I wish it wasn't that way. We could, I'm curious what, you know, staff and whatever thinks about, you know, reading off names. The problem, I'm more than happy to have us do that. People come and go. So at this meeting, I can tell you we had a max of 12 attendees right now. And that included, I think one person was listed up there twice. That included all the people who spoke tonight. Mayor Derwin's on this right now. I'll just let you guys know. Dale Pfau, who spoke, Dana, who spoke, Christy Corley, who spoke, Monica, who spoke, Rita, who spoke, Greg, who spoke. So you've heard from everybody, you know, verbally who is on the call. And
You need to scroll down further.
I've scrolled I think the whole way.
There's Marianne Derwin, Monica.
Yeah, I
did I miss
mentioned
that?
I mentioned both of them.
Rita Gomez, Monica. Sorry if I missed that.
Yeah, I mentioned all those names.
Okay, sorry.
So this comes up at every single meeting, and unfortunately, we just don't have a better solution until we're in person.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Sarah, for clarifying that. That's helpful. Okay, so we need to do a roll call. Who's going to take us through that?
I would be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Bill Kelly,
Yes.
Sarah Werdikoff,
Yes.
Bob Turcott,
Regrettably, no.
Ankoff Sill,
Yes.
Andrew Pierce,
Yes.
Amy Armsby,
Yes.
Jeff Alves,
Yes.
Janie Ward,
Yes.
Sarah Dorahy,
Yes.
Sue Crane. Yes, reflected in the record. Vice Chair Al Sill
Yes.
and Chair Swisher.
Yes. All right. I want to give a huge thanks to the staff for all your work and getting all this pulled together. You did a great job tonight. Super helpful.
Thank you very
shout out
much.
to Dylan for managing all the tech stuff behind the scenes here. Thank you for that. And thanks to everybody in the committee for participating, being here, and it was a good meeting.
And thank you to the chair.
Yeah,
you.
thanks for
Yeah.
running it.
Yeah.
Thanks to the chair.
Good night, everybody. Take
Good
care.
night, everyone.
Everyone, good
Bye.
night.